So we are live now.
Okay, thank you. Honorable Lempo Yishipendro, members of parliaments, UNDP resident representative, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and our audience online. I'd like to extend my warm welcome to everyone to the National Policy Dialogue on Community-Based Landscape Management for Resilient Ecosystems. This is a partnership event between the Bhutan Ecological Society and the Global Environmental Facility Small Grants Program under the UNDP Bhutan. We have a remarkable line of esteemed speakers and panelists today who will be providing overviews and discussing the concept of and how to mainstream integrated landscape approach in conserving biodiversity and building resilience of ecosystems in Bhutan. I'm Kitsopama Wangti, and it's my honor to be the MC for today's event. The agenda today includes a welcome note by Dr. Nawang Nobu, the Executive Vice President of Bhutan Ecological Society, followed by the opening remarks by Amazusa Guputa, the resident representative of UNDP, and the keynote address by His Excellency Lempo Yishipendro. This will be followed by a video on societies in harmony with nature and an introduction to COMDEKS by Mr. Sring Pinso, the National Coordinator for GEF Small Grants. Then a few videos sharing voices from the communities in Trashigang and Jamgang. Afterwards, I will present about the overall projects that were implemented. To help the momentum going, we have decided not to include the 10-minute break, and we will continue on with the agenda. Next, the two panel discussions on landscape approach and financing for socio-ecological production landscapes will be moderated by Ms. Thile Choden and Ms. Pam Lama. This will be followed by a Q&A with you all during the key takeaway segment, and then final vote of thanks by Ms. Pam Lama. Before we start, I would like to share a few housekeeping announcements. Please feel free to raise or share any questions and comments in the chat box for those joining from Facebook Live.
We can't hear you, Kitso. Not yet. Kitso?
Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Great. Now, yes.
Okay, perfect. Sorry. I'll continue with I'll just start continuing with the housekeeping rules. I'm not sure where I last left. So for the last session, during the key takeaways from the audience, you'll have two options to share your questions. So the first option is you can share your questions in the comment section, or the second in the comment section. And your second option is if you'd like to voice your question, please raise the virtual hand. It's the hand icon below, and we will unmute your microphone. For those using the chat box, to help indicate your presenters your question is for, please kindly write their names in the chat section along with your questions. Please keep your questions concise and focused in order to facilitate a better response from our speakers. And no further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Nawang Nobu, the Executive Vice President of Bhutan Ecological Society, to deliver the welcome note.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Kitso. Honorable Minister for Agriculture, Lempo Yishe, it's always good to see you, although it's always been online. Need to pay you a visit in person very soon, I think. Honorable members of Parliament, resident representative of the UNDP, Madam Azusa, I hear that you're in Japan. I hope you're keeping well. Country representative of the WWF, Mr. Tashi Jamso, representatives from JICA, local leaders and representatives from communities from across Bhutan who are joining us online, colleagues from the Royal Government, from NEC, from GNHC, and other government agencies, civil society counterparts, members from the academia and the general public. A very good morning and a very warm welcome to the National COMDEKS Dialogues. At the behest of the GEF Small Grants Program administered by the UNDP, the Bhutan Ecological Society has been coordinating a series of dialogues at the local and regional level to understand, take stock, and note lessons learned from the many projects which have been implemented, particularly across Eastern and Central Bhutan, as I understand it, as part of the Satoyama Initiative. I think today in our time, everybody knows this now, the impacts of climate change are felt not only in developing countries, but across many Western countries as well. Now in the US, fires are raging, floods in Germany, much of Europe, already manifesting. I think re-engaging and recommitting ourselves to nature is not only timely, but I think it's the need of the moment. As such, appreciating landscapes and viewing initiatives, programs, and progress at the landscape level may allow us to address many of the challenges we face today in a much more cohesive, coherent, and inclusive manner. To this end, lesson sharing, learning together, and dialogues, although I personally feel we have all been zoomed out over the last 2 years or so, is still very, very important and remains one of the most potent tools we have as a species to learn together, adapt, and collectively address our common challenges. I think today's platform is one such effort to further our efforts in understanding. Having said that, I once again welcome Your Excellency. I know he's a very busy man. The Honorable Minister for gracing this occasion. We are very grateful. Madam Azusa, who joins us from Japan, members of Parliament, WWF, representatives from JICA, community members, and all other participants joining us in this important national dialogues. I hope we'll be able to gather and take away some valuable lessons to ensure that nature and landscapes urgently find the attention they truly deserve as we move forward. With that, I once again welcome everybody on behalf of the Ecological Society as well as the Small Grants Program, and thank everybody once again and look forward to a fruitful session today. Thank you very much. And once again, welcome everyone. Thank you. Over to Kitso.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Nawang. Next, I have the great pleasure to welcome Amazusa Kuputa, the resident representative of UNDP. We are delighted to have you tune in from Tokyo for the opening remarks.
Thank you, Kitso. Greetings from a very, very hot Tokyo. Honorable Limpo Yespenjor, Honorable Minister for Agriculture and Forest, thank you so much for giving us your support as always. And honorable members of the Parliament, representatives from the Royal Government of Bhutan, different institutions, civil society organizations, academia, and also development partners, and the panel members and virtual participants from Bhutan and beyond. Very good morning, Kuzu-san Pola. Thank you for joining on the first day of the National Vaccine Campaign. It is my honor to be with you virtually at the National Dialogue on Community-Based Landscape Management for Resilient Ecosystems. I'm particularly pleased with the opportunity today to hear how an approach which has been practiced over a century resonates here in Bhutan. As you know, Satoyama is a Japanese term. It gives me a sense of almost nostalgia, filled with warm feelings. And I think it's because the term is often associated with the landscapes of the old past, good old days, and motherland in rural communities where many of the urban dwellers have left behind. Literally, Sato means village, and Yama means hills or mountain. Satoyama has been developed through centuries of small-scale use of agricultural and forestry resources. The concept of Satoyama has several definitions and represents a mosaic of different landscapes. It has been a way of life that contributed to environmental conservation for sure, and the optimal and sustainable use of resources towards zero waste. Due to its various benefits, the concept attracted international attention. The Satoyama Initiative was established at UNESCO headquarters in Paris in 2009 as a global effort to realize societies in harmony with nature. The Satoyama landscapes and similar landscapes around the world have been recognized and promoted as a good model for conservation of biodiversity and human well-being. As a global leader on environment conservation, Bhutan and its people have always strived towards living in harmony with nature. And indeed, many of the landscapes, the beautiful and biodiversity-rich landscapes I have seen while traveling around the country very much reminded me of home, the Satoyamas at home. However, multiple factors are threatening Satoyamas. For the first time in our history, the most serious and immediate, even existential risks are human-made and unfolding at a planetary scale. A case in point is the COVID-19 crisis, which has clearly demonstrated the direct link between environment degradation and pandemics, and how off sync we all have become with nature. Preserving the tradition requires conscious efforts. Satoyamas have been quickly disappearing in Japan due to the drastic shift in our ways of living and rural-urban migration. This has had visible impact on biodiversity conservation efforts. A significant number of natural habitats have lost home, and their existence has been under threat. Bhutan is not an exception. Data from 2019 I was looking at suggest 21% of people have migrated to urban areas, leaving agricultural land fallow, you all know, and houses became empty, like guntons. Climate change, as already mentioned, is being added to this equation, weakening the resilience of our ecosystems. Because climate change will have the worst impact on the world's poorest people, and most of the poorest people of the world are farmers, often found in rural communities. Any efforts to minimize the impact of the changes must have a focus on communities in rural settings. Climate change is forcing many farmers around the world to give up their agricultural land and activities. That is why adaptation is a major focus for the agricultural sector globally and in Bhutan, and certainly it is for us in UNDP. This year's slogan for the Biodiversity Day, "We're part of the solution," was chosen to be a continuation of the momentum generated last year under the overarching theme of "Our solutions are in nature." It was an important reminder that biodiversity is the foundation upon which we can build back better from the COVID-19 crisis. And indeed, solutions lie in our actions, while we are also causes of the problems. Bhutan's protected areas provide a refuge for many plant and animal species that are essential for our ecosystem services. However, much of the biodiversity remains outside of those protected areas, where it is exposed to human activities such as agricultural production, forestry, and other land uses. The fate of our biodiversity and of vital ecological processes depends very much on the sound management of resources by the local communities. This is where the roles of the community development and knowledge management for Satoyama Initiative really comes in. The Satoyama approach for promoting communities in harmony with nature must be promoted further through participatory decision-making processes in local communities. The Jeff Small Grants Program implemented by UNDP in partnership with the Royal Government and many others since 1998 has provided avenues through which the communities can apply the Satoyama landscape management principles in our efforts towards biodiversity conservation, climate adaptation, waste management, water resource management, and sustainable forest and land management. For example, starting in 2014, the SGP initiated landscape-based conservation, starting with the Gamri watershed in Tashigan, followed by Lower Manas Basin in Shangan, and finally in Lower Pemergatso. Bhutan has everything lined up to showcase how the landscape management principles can be catalytic. It is a country rich in traditional practices, knowledge in environmental conservation. It is blessed with very committed, competent leadership and strong conservation policies. The Satoyama Initiative and its approaches can be meaningfully orchestrated for the good of Bhutan's environment and attainment of SDGs. Partnership with WWF Bhutan, Bhutan Trust Fund for Environmental Conservation, Bhutan for Life, and others will allow for collective biodiversity conservation efforts within and beyond protected areas through the application of the Satoyama approach, and ultimately contribute towards the ambitious post-2020 global diversity framework, which is stepping stone towards the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature. So it is my sincere hope that today's dialogue will not only facilitate sharing of knowledge and exchange of lessons, but also lead concretely to actions that would promote integration of landscape approach to development in national and subnational planning and budgeting processes. Unfortunately, scientific evidence is against us. While Bhutan has been leading global efforts in environmental conservation, that has not spared us from the impact of climate change. According to the researchers cited by a panel of climate scientists, a rise of 2 degrees Celsius would cut the geographic range of vertebrates by 8%, plants by 16%, and insects by 18%. And we are really going into that direction. If we are set to pursue living in harmony with nature, we really have no time to waste. The current efforts must be amplified in terms of their scope, speed, and level of ambition. So I'd like to really thank the Bhutan Ecological Society for coming together with us through the UNDP GEF Small Grants Program in organizing this dialogue. And I will also thank all the other partners in the government and civil society for sharing the lessons and taking the approach to a new level. I wish you a rich and meaningful dialogue for the rest of the day. Thank you so much, and tashidere. Back to you, Kitso.
Thank you, Amazusa, for the comprehensive remark and articulating the beautiful definition of Satoyama and its role. With that, I'm honored to invite Honorable Lempuishi Pendro, Minister of Agriculture and Forest, to give the keynote address.
Excellencies, Member of Parliament, and their representatives of the international organizations, civil societies, and the colleagues from the Royal Government of Bhutan, and all the friends here. Very good morning, and thank you so much for the organizers and all the colleagues for giving me this opportunity to be the part of the opening session for this national dialogue on community-based landscape management for resilient ecosystems. And of course, specifically, nice to see you, Amasuda, still standing very, very bright and happy there in Japan. I hope you completed your quarantine period and you are already enjoying your time with your family. I wish you all the happiness there in Japan. During my participation in the climate change conferences representing the Royal Government of Bhutan, 2 common phrases that I heard in the climate change conferences, and that keeps on echoing into my ears is, I mean, these are the think globally, act locally. And the other phrase is learning by doing. And if you really assess this here in Bhutan, I would like to thank Jeff Small Grant Program, Jeff Sustainable Land Management, and Jeff's support to the conservation efforts through the national parks here in Bhutan. These programs are really demonstrating the examples of this think globally, act locally, and then learning by doing. So for Bhutan, as said by Amasa, although we, by culture, by our inheritance, we definitely are a champion of the environment conservation, but then there are lots of things that we need to learn scientifically and technologically. And these things for a least developed country, it can happen only by doing things at a small scale at local level, and then also by by doing things in a pilot scale, and then learning from it, and then replicate the scale of the activity at the national level or even at the regional level. So that way, as I was saying, the two phrases that I heard in the climate change conferences are being actually practiced here in Bhutan with all these programs supported by Jeff and UNDP. So thank you so much to Global Environment Facility and UNDP, and of course all other international agencies like JICA, WWF, and many other agencies who have been supporting Bhutan's efforts in the ecological conservation and other environmental activities. When we talk of the impacts of climate change in Bhutan now, very significant things that we are realizing are on the water resources. One is on the water resources. The water resources are drying up. Water resources, I mean, because of the unprecedented shift of the monsoon patterns, we are experiencing unprecedented flash floods and landslides. The other thing is that what we have not realized, but things are happening on the ground, is the migration of the biodiversity species, be it plant species or animal species. The migration is taking place. So in many different areas, the existence of new biodiversity species are realizing, which is making the life of the people, especially the farmers, difficult to adapt to the new environment. So these are some of the things that we need to educate our farmers. We need to support our farmers in realizing the changes, and then also the ways and technologies to actually adapt to the new environment. Now in Bhutan, the Japanese Satoyama approach is nothing different from the timber pinji concept in Bhutan. In Bhutan, we believe in the connectivity between the people and the environment, the connectivity between the wildlife and the people, and also the connectivity between different sections of the country. Only if we can live in harmony with each other, only if we can be self-contented, or if we can think of others, the impact on others by your action, then only we can work together to live in harmony with each other. So often the complaint is that when we talk of the human wildlife conflict, we always take into considerations of the animals impacting on the human beings, but we are not realizing how much we are impacting on the habitat areas of the wildlife. So I mean, if as human beings, if we tend to understand this this disturbance that we are creating on the wildlife, then obviously we can find out ways to make the wildlife live in harmony with the human beings. So these are some very small things that we need to really analyze. We need to really develop strategies how to live in harmony with the nature. And for this, again, the adaptation program that again started with the concept of learning by doing. The National Adaptation Program for the LDCs actually was built on this concept. To get to the level of the National Adaptation Program, the LDCs in the climate change conferences negotiated that we need to have a NAPA program for the LDCs, so that we can gain experiences, learn more, and then be able to develop the national adaptation program. So that way, the NAPA has been very beneficial to the LDCs, and particularly for Bhutan, the NAPA program 1, 2, 3, all the phases had its impacts, and of course build the capacity of the Bhutan. Now I'm quite confident that Bhutan can now step onto building a national adaptation program, which is for a longer term, for a more sustainable sustainable means, and then also that the national adaptation program can also contribute to the nationally determined contributions that we are required to update ourselves time to time in requirements of the Paris Agreement. So that way, I would like to say that the Royal Government of Bhutan very much would like to be active, take the leadership seat in environment conservation as well as in the climate change negotiations. But then we need to have the support, continuous support of all our colleagues from the international agencies, be it multilateral at the multilateral program level, at the bilateral level, and then of course from the international NGOs as well as the national NGOs for supporting us. So lately, the Bhutan Ecological Society, led by Dr. Ngawang, and then of course my good old colleague from the GPP Bhutan, Pem Lama there. I'm very confident that the efforts that the government and the civil societies, the international agencies we are making will be definitely supported by Bhutan Ecological Society's team with your knowledge, your experience, and all the zeal that you have in the environment conservation law. So with this few words, I hope I have made some sense in today's, the opening of today's national dialogue on the community-based landscape management for resilient ecosystem. For a small country like Bhutan, we cannot avoid living with the nature, and for that the landscape management definitely is a primary need. And for the Minister of Agriculture and Forest, with the support from Jeff, the sustainable land management is demonstrating a good example in how the agricultural fields can be made more productive, how water in the agriculture fields can be retained better, how the soil nutrients can be retained better in the through this land management system. Things are coming in place, and as I was saying, we keep on learning by doing. And I would like to emphasize to all our partners, our development partners, to continue supporting the land management, continue supporting the small grant program at a very small scale, but definitely educating the local people and conserving the environment at the local level, which is providing drinking water to the local people, and then also letting people learn how environment conservation can benefit for their own livelihood resources. So these are very significant programs, impacts that are coming out of the small grant program and the sustainable land management. So with this, once again, thank you so much to all of you for giving me the opportunity. I'll be staying here for another 15 minutes. I have another program set at 10. So 5 minutes before 10, I will be leaving the forum, and I would like to wish everyone a successful national dialogue on the days to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Excellency, for the insightful message, particularly linking Satoyama to the national projects and reminding us to work together to live in harmony with nature. I would like to now request everyone for a group photo. If all the speakers could kindly turn on your camera. Apologies to our online audience that this will not take too long. So Tenzin, please let us know when you're ready to take the picture.
Should we say Satoyama, Kitsu? What are we supposed to say?
I was going to count to 3, but we can say Satoyama too.
1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Honorable Limpo, I think Limpo mentioned he would leave in 10 minutes, but I think if Limpo and UNDP representative, Amazusa, if you'd like to take leave now as well, though, but before that, we would like to extend our sincere gratitude for gracing us with your presence. And now moving on, we would like to share a short video to set the scene. The video will give a brief overview of the COMDEKS projects and highlight on the project activities and the key results achieved. On to Sir Tenzin. I hope you enjoyed the video and photos around the world from the 20 countries who have joined the COMDEKS initiative. Next up, we have Mr. Ting Pinso, the National Coordinator of GEF Small Grants Program under UNDP, who will provide an introduction to COMDEKS landscape management and its contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals and post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Over to you, Lasa Tsering.
Lasula. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Kiso, for the introduction. I hope everyone liked the video on COMDEKS. Honorable Minister, Agriculture Minister Lempo Yishe, Asuza, Honorable NC members of the Natural Resources and Environment Committee of the National Council of Bhutan, esteemed panel members, esteemed speakers, and all the online viewers. I'll be presenting on the COMDEKS.
Sorry, Serene. It looks like your presentation is having some things. So can I share your presentation? Let's stop your presentation.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, let me know when I'm good to go. Again, am I good to go?
Yes, sir.
Thank you again. Apologies for the glitch. Now we are back. So I'll be presenting on the COMDEKS landscape in Bhutan, socio-ecological protection landscapes and its contribution to SDGs and the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And this is purely Jeff Smallgren's program's experience here in Bhutan. I hope I'll be able to do justice to this big topic. Next slide, please. Living in harmony with nature. So this sentence has been mentioned several times this morning by the earlier speakers, and it will be the center of our dialogue this entire morning. And this living in harmony with nature, as mentioned by the speakers, is a vision of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, and it's developed by the open-ended working group of the CBD. And by 2050, we are supposed to reach to a state where the humans live in harmony with nature. Next slide, please. I would like to delve a little bit deeper into the theory of change of post-2020 global biodiversity framework. So if you look at this theory of change over the next 30 years, we are supposed to go from current state of chaotic state to a state where we live in harmony with nature, and the current status where there's loss of biodiversity and jeopardizing human well-being and sustainable development within the framework of enabling conditions, the required tools, solutions, which will ultimately reduce threats to the ecosystem, species, and genetic diversity. And at the same time, human needs are met and the benefits are shared equitably. So this is quite an ambitious, task, and it has given us only 30 years. And the framework's theory of change recognizes that urgent policy action at national, regional, and global level is required to transform economic, social, and financial models so that the trends that have worsened the biodiversity loss will stabilize in the next 10 years, and that it will allow for recovery of natural ecosystems in the following 20 years. So within the 50 years, with the net improvement by 2050 to achieve the CBD's vision of living in harmony with nature. However, the assumption, the theory of change, the assumption is that a whole of society approach and whole of government approach is required to make the changes needed for the next 10 years. And as such, government and societies need to determine priorities and allocate financial and other resources to achieve this big feat. Next slide, please. Let me talk a little bit about the landscape approach to environmental conservation. So in the context of achieving the global conservation goals, it requires local landscape level approaches to support national implementation of convention. And it is done through the implementation of National Biodiversity Action Plan in each country. Protected area management has gradually evolved from a species-based conservation approach to livelihoods-based conservation landscape approach. And it has also included acceptance of communities as an integral part of national level conservation initiatives. And it is very true with Bhutan. Next, please. And there has been also a gradual recognition of the other effective area-based conservation measures, OECMs. And conservation measures are mostly outside the protected area system. A community-based approach to landscape management, COMDEKS, which stands for Community Development and Knowledge Management for Satoyama Initiative, has been adopted by Jeff Smallgren's program here in Bhutan as well. COMDEKS promotes resource management approaches and positive human-nature interaction in various geographically distinct socio-ecological production landscapes. Next, please. So when I talk about the production system and the production activities, it includes agriculture, forestry, fisheries, herding, and livestock production, among others. SGP has adopted COMDEKS landscape approach since 2013, and each landscape which has been identified through a national process are ecologically rich and has an implementation strategy. Next. So over the past several years, about 8 years on now, so we have developed 3 country program strategy for 3 distinct landscapes: Gamri watershed, Lower Manas in Shemgang, and Lower Pemogasal. Next, please. So these the 3 landscape SGP COMDEKS landscape. If it is superimposed on the national protected area system, this is how it looks like. And if you may observe, majority of the areas under the COMDEKS landscape falls outside the protected area system. Gamri watershed in Tashkang, Lower Manas in Shemgang, and the third one is in Lower Pemogasal. Next one. I would like to briefly now, in the next few slides, I'll quickly provide a snapshot of the 3 watershed. And if you look at this Gamri watershed, the map shows a dynamic mosaic of habitats and land use in Gamri watershed, and showing the highlands, the mid altitudes where people grow paddies, and the lowland where people have dryland agriculture. So a very unique agriculture landscape production system in Gamri watershed, in a small watershed. Next slide. And similarly, the Lower Manas Basin, the lower 5 geogs of Shemgang district. So this is also a unique landscape in the sense that compared to the Gamri watershed, this is itself a very different landscape. About 85 to 90% of the area is under forest cover. And landscapes vary widely due to their unique climatic conditions, geographic conditions, cultural and socio-economic conditions. And Shemgang is another distinct landscape. Next slide, please. And our SGP's operational phase 7 landscape is in Lower Pemogasal, and Lower Pemogasal also have a distinct biocultural production system, and in its own way is a different landscape in itself. Next slide. Now, in terms of the types, the typologies of project, we have in the 3 landscapes being implemented in diverse projects. Just to name a few: sustainable forest and land management, rangeland management, promotion of traditional knowledge, traditional varieties, building the resilience to the physical impacts of climate change through nature-based solutions, soil and water conservation, agroforestry. So all of these projects under the broad framework of gender and social inclusion. Next slide again. So from all the COMDEKS landscapes and the experiences and lessons over the past several years, COMDEKS has been able to support the institution and growth of grassroots civil societies, building the capacities of civil societies, including community-based organization, academia, and local actors, strengthening of local governance, integration of upstream and downstream conservation challenges, and making small grants available to communities, which are very important, knowledge management, and enhancing the people's livelihood across different landscapes. And all this provides opportunities to support conservation outside the protected area system. Next, please. So in a nutshell, the small grants and the COMDEKS approach have substantially contributed to the environment management and enhancement of the livelihood. And COMDEKS has been promoting the resilience of socio-ecological production landscapes and contributes to the societies living in harmony with nature. Next, again. So this is my final slide. I would like to leave with the question to the audience and the panel members later to ponder upon. So how can we scale up COMDEKS experiences across other landscapes and larger landscapes? So maybe what to discuss later in the panel. Lasola, thank you, Kitso. Back to you.
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Sering, for the thorough introduction and highlighting the role of integrated landscape management. Next, we will now watch a short video from Yeneng Barsang and hear their approach into about the integrated landscape management and see what they've achieved. Thus, over to Sir Tenzin.
이가 배워진데 사디랑 다진베니 같이 매블 높수를 쌓인 벨라 몰라.
살레틴데 같이 디마토 마칠리딘데 사마 플레데메나. 사미 바친 같이 삼리나 데르미 소슈니나. 같이 이 디갈라 지미리 장망 종가기 올로인 수니
샴과 종가 바르도 기오 베면디 남다바 다들기 기오지라 데 랑드비지 데 해마 밤수기 착타로 제수노세 노 타말 파다와진 저 잠지레이라 야다른 사 갭 잠지고 몰라
Kepa ibda namsam lahadula sa ngati shi mubdalu gezagi yuma chabdalu pada sumberde tam madi khakadula
같이 언제나 세마나 데일러 베라미 수벨라. 그래 아니 검시 점자니 타고로 짐기 타고 점지로 angula게 수벨. 같이 데 얼루지 예미 바데 라하르 다메 chapter din am sami shubere chabile chabile ngati ma ngati halam chi chunku be dibda din phale mai richi ba anale nam sami chi ba ila dela phale ngati data chitin chi ba la anale ba ye
chap shube chap uma zu kubidelo ngati internal be top la no ni sa lishim diso gara chuki dak chak ba ye gale keza lotu diso lishim be toma sumitu ishuni
Chuledi nalera theme sishunila. Ema bewechindi na sa do diso gara humbe din mingang chakbaye din school diso gara chakbaye sishunila.
Concept ki khalo ta ni phongi kangen disule ten dinam sami jumme sishunila ta dige mathoba tarina bazum chibawa chi na chiragi gungthong ki kangen semi so dile ten di jumme sishunila. Ngachiragi loni gi legal de ngachira tamba 2017 ki January nale gochu isi shuni ta disu bedi gi be ngachiragi da sago dinalo sari da churi kani gi chi disu be ngachiragi da sagi ne tandi lejum zoni gi ta disu ngachiragi migil ke do se shuni
then maung pal alu dislo de gachi shisha gachi teni sire de sadi dazibe azum tewa chinde leshmi meminala te sale teni mazaw chinga chi minablu di te shenten sa gate mindu se shudu ngara be chinla
ta dinalo mi chie japko ko majaba dinalo mi karagi chamato di phogeda amsu se memba teru kara dinalo dururu ten bede ngachiru ani charu beise shunila ekar le cheba chin hipchi ekar chipchu she nga de chi de nga chiragi da stone bunding gi thakalu nga chiragi la beisi shuni 다 랑고 두고 배워진다 신디라 레주 미 맵도지 배워진 디나로 다 신나는 게미 로토디 레주 미 오메스 슈니 또 로토디 레주 메비 간에 있다가 저기 침나로 자산나로 랑고디 밀라메스 슈니
도시 잠니디소 나 델레닝가 지라니 사수니 밀라라 그지라 네피르세 안디소수 안디 베심레데 아시 남섬 레심베 종세 리웨 디베케도 데 조에 조메라 안좀데
마라디 도시 부레 나레레 나누라 텔라 짜야 나누 텔레 electric fencing greenhouse 아니 수 나누라 다 아니 속에 펜도데 자 체모 베라둘라 다 베베와친다 electric fencing 베와친디 데사니 콜롱티 제살로데 데 아니 리다 셈진 팝다 아니 속이데 게자기 신 피두지에 맞아시 슈니라 나 당보 민 라마사 민제 개와 공마 팜기 사디 사섬시디 다진 탐미리 같이 부시기 갱쿠리멜 땡파 톰날로 디미가 미와디데 땡같이 사수칼로 랑게 라 베수와친 데랑게 내갑당 탑다 셰랍기 숭르기 톨라 잡아친디 데미시데 다 계수세 주니라 다 슝루데 같이로나 데 프로그램 데 레샤 맘베나미딜루 땡같이 디글라 치우기 몬톨레 데카치 데치 나메사미 셈게 딩레랑 카트린 가서 bombe 예시 슈도라
Thank you for the video from the Vela and Langdrupi community. We now have another video on the voices from the community, and in this video we'll be hearing voices from the field. The Kaps and Tokpas from the various communities will share their insights about the projects, its benefits and impact. Over to you, Sir Tenzin.
남런이동 주순다 남런이동 주시기로도 대 UNDP다 대 SCP 니기 대 망골 도람게 돌에 대 레골지 나누 세션이나 레골디야 라진네당 숭천당저의 레골지 매 세션이나 대 레골디야 대 같이 교육 덕종당 대 같이 덕셀레쿵 대 미스르당 남들기 돌에 레골지 라베누 세션이나 데 라디아 담바라 데 슈카 송축기 라디아 데 같이 벌점 교육이 지우마 예비라 지우마 예비나래 같이르기 미스르드수 데 슈카 감준이기 nen가예스루 다노 세션이나 데 슈카 카 두디지 다노 담바라 데 같이 벌점 교육 난가르 지우기 데 건바 서파 데 방탕 데 라마건바 대기 마세바 데 가시라게 스웨 시텐 멘강 드림당바이 추이까당 데레 다루 데 차돌라항 더상기 추이까 데레 가지 데 가지 박삼 롭다테와기 추이까디스로 데 라지네타만드로이 숭축기라 베노 세션이 라디앙 데 추까 감 미감니기들로 데 신기 잠디수주 데레 셈진디기 네파 메케니기 데레 데 타고르 라우첩 데베 베노 세션이나 다 니바벨다 데 가지라이 소남싱남도 따노 세션이나 소남싱남디야 데 같이 구멍지오 데 기통도 따노 세션이나 데 소남싱남디 같이 미스터 소남바츠기 데 메타 맵지 임발레텐 소남싱남 템베 남디도 데 미스터 제치기 데 추진당 감징지술로 데 맵따노 세션이나 대 맵다살루 대 아니 집적 대 아니디 사치 베투베 야시 세슈니나 대 집디기 마도와 가스페디스라 잡지 세슈니나 다루 대 목탕가라 지우루라 대 소남싱남누레 대 집디스 잡는 세슈니나 다루 숨바베다 대 산에 에낭라루 대 신기 잠디수 레샤베 숙종 탐는 세슈니나 대 야마기 베미기 라디스야 두데다 레시메 타르케 젠치베 주누 세슈니나 아니 레굴디기 라루텐 ngaji miser sonamba disya de choi netang yada yasuno seshunina de nalepa beru maongba beru de UNDP da SGB gi de mangol dorame namachin de ngaji miser da rangashi netang loya de pamba bombera onime seshunina
zachi mabe losum tu ti ya sono tunila yani zachi mabe mi deru chubika mi jo delani be dimension an be shimle ngati gina gara ro sema pesha la mabe tombe li be bendi tenga chi gara lukdi dan jumgi sadi le shimle zo su chi shunila dana nagi sagonara bungbo be tin kon keji duji ti dula de mi anum chi ngati pento chi shunila tenga chi mapa yema gosub de ngati lo kon sonampa takpachili ge mi la telengati da gusube da lo dinna jidula anbedlo da ngati domgi ko ni nija sumchu ti shunila anbedlo da konda jiga ngati ki 담바들에 같은 것도 ngati ko sa tom limit sunalo ngati sesi de suchu telagi de jiga ngati 신기 de suchu ge telengati ki be 송람 진데 ngati ki 송송 리안 좀 진도 shunila 다 한신의 시장 태가 배진디 다 남성의 편바 자초베레 shunila 담바 같이 be 뭐 ngati ki na sa tom ani be sha telefon la be chu ga le 콩 때 나가지 세만할래 봐때 마추 담다디 아니 좀베 조미디에 같이 가수베 순이라 콩 담바데 데니버디 땡아치기 나루 안 좀베 레샤 수베왕래 땡아치기 다 나기 심진 리더 심진 디술로 베디베르야 땡아치기 데도마도 아니베 수베강래 콩 디술레양 땡아치기 야 세만할래 봐 아니베 리미디술로 땡아치 가둘레 때 콩다 지컵에 대화 탑베 데미디술로 같이 고아셰디 빈수베 순이라 콩로 대사고디수 아니 공기 공로 더블너브 소총기 델로 펜토니 델로 여기 밤리 안디수 숲 좀바징 하게 되지 아니 펜바지 안 두는 거야. 근데 지디 생아치라기 세만날에 봐. 생아치라기 세만나기 셈진 자미기 리 생아치기 신대베롱 같이베롱 다니디수에 세만날에 봐또 미미디수에 숲에 다른 배워진 같이 나나 또 안좀에 숲에 미디수로 네바 밑점이 좀 많이 배 소유 주니라. 도람기 제가 된 아이 배웠는데 망일디기 다디남 좀 까민도 쉬나 같은 데진 론도 뭐도 안좀 더 보나 봐. 단좀 까민도 다디 곱디랑 홀로 같은 데지 캐축이 가도래 지라. 텔레 같이로 배로 텔라 배우도로 지 캐축이 같은 배미소 아니지. 텔레 니버디 다 콘다 지가 같이 대화 탑배 때 배뚝 마뚝 같이 있나 같이기 팸이나 아니 디수기 딜로 고아 다투 디수 레이션 배진 배워진 아니기 팬통이는
Thank you for the video. And a fun fact about KNC is that they've rehabilitated about 93 hectares of leased land that was left fallow for 32 years by planting bananas, watermelons, and vegetables. And I think Sir Chilewan, the chairman of KNC, has also joined us today. So thank you for being here. Moving on, I will now share my screen and share a bit about the COMDEKS projects. So Tsing had shared a brief overview about the projects earlier, and I'll go a little bit more in depth. The Gummy watershed spreads over 8 gewaks in Trashigang Songkhak. The area was identified mainly because of its rich biological resources and the unique rockwork culture. The natural resources here are under increasing pressure from grazing and extraction of natural resources, which has led to events of landslides and drying of water resources. These watershed conditions demanded sustainable management interventions. Here are some of the challenges faced in the different zone areas. Challenges included pressures on grassland management due to overgrazing, deforestation, loss of farmlands, and human-wildlife conflicts. One of the reasons responsible for land degradation in this zone is the construction of farm roads, which increases surface runoffs during the monsoon due to the lack of proper drainage systems. Next, Lower Manas Basin. This covers about 5 GW. It was identified due to having one of the highest poverty rates in the country and its large-scale ecological benefits from the Manas River and the varieties of wildlife species. The challenges are here. Human-wildlife conflicts were one of the major issues faced in these GWOCs, where some of the farmers even abandoned their dry farmlands and stopped the traditional cultivation of rice and wheat, followed by the decline in cultivation of traditional crops. This was primarily because of the availability of high-yielding varieties of other crops and due to ready and cheap convenience of rice imported from India. Shortage of drinking and irrigation water was also caused due to the poor connection of water and the drying of water sources. Even with easy access to electricity, some people still heavily dependent on the fuel wood, mainly for fodder cooking and mass cooking in communities, monasteries, and schools. In response to the previous challenges faced by the communities in both Kamri watershed and Lower Manas Basin, the following are a combination of the SGP and COMDEKS project implemented by the communities as well as the project outcomes. The communities were trained on sustainable natural resource management and awareness campaigns on protection of ecosystems, which has helped increase the vegetation coverage and management of community forests. Several community water sources were also secured through plantation of saplings and fencings, which helped improve the community's health through safe and reliable water supply. Efficient cooking stoves were provided to schools and temples, which helped reduce the heavy dependence on fuel wood. Construction of Gaben walls helped safeguard the Saktan village from land erosion and floods during the changing river courses. Construction of proper bridges have also replaced the temporary bridges and have reduced tree felling. A few of the projects were geared towards establishing source of income and increasing alternative options for household income. Some engaged in raising high-yielding breeds of cattle like jerseys. Others were trained in processing and the production of turmeric powder and mustard oil. Some communities were also provided power tillers to increase their farming efficiency. So this gives you an idea of the 7 projects that were implemented in Tashigang between the time period of 2013 and 15. And similarly, in Jamgang, also 7 projects were implemented between 2016 and 2018. We had the chance to visit a few of the projects and communities in Tashigang and Jamgang in April. I'll be sharing some insights and observations we made during our community consultations. So overall, the projects resulted positive outcomes. As mentioned earlier, several community water sources and agriculture lands were secured through construction of causeways, check dams, and stone bundings. The plantation and through plantation of napier grasses, which was also used as a fodder. Fallow lands were rehabilitated and reduced human-wildlife conflicts through electric fencings. Cash income opportunities were developed to improve livelihoods through activities like bamboo and banana plantation, production of turmerics, and others. For recommendations from the communities, they were looking for financial and technical support to maintain the already existing infrastructures like the causeways and then the cabin walls, and to also start and manage new entrepreneurial activities such as wood and bamboo crafting, marketing their turmeric powder, growing fruit trees for direct markets. So overall, they were interested in developing reliable farm to market access for their produce, as well as to develop entrepreneurial skills. A common issue we observed was many of the community-based organizations do not exist outside of the project. After the end of each project period, most groups either dissolved or became inactive, and some members had left as well. Another observation was most of the communities are still waiting for more interventions and support from the government and donor organizations. Community-based intervention versus individual-based intervention. Although this is a community-based funded projects, we noticed with the electric fencings and power tiller initiatives, farmers were more keen on utilizing it on an individual basis than as a group. Traditional knowledge, local varieties of crops and livestock are not actively preserved. Farmers are still struggling to preserve the local seeds, but the hybrid seeds provide better yield. So it is a difficult balance between the goals for self-sufficiency and biodiversity conservation. Similarly to the community consultations, we had a few consultations with the relevant stakeholders from the Ministry of Agriculture and Forests and our conservation partners. Here are some insights from our discussion regarding the sustainability and mainstreaming for integrated landscape management. It was recommended for projects to develop exit strategies by involving the local communities in advance and encouraging community ownership to ensure long-term sustainability and effectiveness of the interventions. Projects similar to COMDEKS or with the integrated landscape approach can be submitted to the MOF's annual review of work plans for project collaborations and future partnership synergies. In addition to integrating such projects into the annual work plans, the GEWOC development plans could also follow a landscape approach so that the budget can be allocated within the GEWOC plans, and also to involve implementing CSOs from relevant fields to engage with the government. This recommendation in itself says much about the need for strong cross-sector collaborations to work towards a common goal. Collaboration and working together was one of the common themes that resonated throughout the consultations. By bridging silos, consulting with relevant organizations, bringing together the multi-sector agencies working in the same landscape, be it the environmental conservation, production, finance, road, agriculture, livestock, and more to scale up together. Sustainable land management can be mainstreamed by treating it as a business model and also incentivizing farmers by researching and creating a value chain for their products, as well as linking them to the direct markets. And I think, as Lempo had mentioned also, last one is also to adopt a community project to implement the activities and to show results. Thank you all for listening. We will now move on to the next panel discussion. I'm pleased to invite Ms. Pam Lama, the Director of Bhutan Ecological Society, as the moderator for the first panel session on landscape approach, which will discuss lessons and insights on effectiveness of landscape approach in biodiversity conservation and sustainable development. Over to you, Pam.
Yes, thank you so much, Kitso, for that introduction. Firstly, welcome to all the viewers on Zoom as well as online. My colleagues earlier, as well as all of the keynote speakers, have presented a very, I think, comprehensive idea on what this national dialogue is about. So my hope is that in this session, we can bring in some, real-time sort of ideas of how this landscape approach can be integrated, because as we learned from this morning, there is a lot that has been done, but also that there is a lot that needs to be done, because in terms of mainstreaming and upscaling and integration of this landscapes approach into our plans and programs, we have much to be done. So this panel session will discuss some of the, firstly, I think I'd like to start this by saying that we have focused a lot on the SGP small grant, GEF SGP small grant programs, but there are several other interventions in Bhutan that have, I think, similar visions to this, GEF SGP, and that have also adopted some form of landscape approach. Of course, as mentioned by Honorable Lempo earlier, the NAPA projects, especially the NAPA 3 project on enhancing sustainability and climate resilience of landscapes is a very pertinent example that of a landscape approach that's being pursued in Bhutan. And similarly, even the Living Landscapes project by the WWF towards securing what they call high conservation values with the aim to improve community livelihoods in large landscapes, I think is also another such approach. Of course, the small grants approach by the SGP, UN SGP, is based on what is called the socio-ecological production landscapes and seascapes, or the SAPL approach. But this is not, I think, just one thing. So with this panel session, I would like to go a little bit beyond the GEF SGP small grants and use this as a launch pad to really talk about landscape approach overall and biodiversity conservation through this landscape approach. So my panelists today will not be discussing too much on just how the GEF small grants program should be integrated, but more this idea of landscape approach for biodiversity conservation. The structure for today's panel is that we'll dive straight into questions, so no presentations by our speakers, unless of course they have small slides to answer questions. So we'll have a structured discussion for the first 40 minutes. And for you attendees watching online, we'll have a 20-minute follow-up of Q&A for this panel. As Kitso mentioned, you can either send your questions through the chat boxes and the comment sections on Facebook, and we'll take your questions then. So with that, let me start the session. And I'll first introduce all of my panelists, and then we can dive straight into the questions. So today in our panel, it's my pleasure to invite Mr. Pema Baza, who's the first panelist, who's a planning officer by profession, an economist by education, and a climate change agent by passion. He's also the project manager with the JNHC Commission, and he leads a team of passionate climate change practitioners championing the cause of biodiversity conservation and climate adaptive community development through the NAPA 3 project. As I mentioned, the NAPA 3 project is implemented on the principles of integrated landscape management. Mr. Pema Baza has also served in various capacities spanning the sphere of local governance, planning, research, economics, and project management. He has a master's degree in international and development economics from the Australian National University. So welcome, Mr. Pema Baza. The second panelist we have here is Ms. Sonam Hadin Khandu, She's the Chief Environment Officer under the Biodiversity and Land Use Division of the National Environment Commission Secretariat, or NECS. She's also the national focal point of the Convention on Biological Diversity. She has a bachelor's degree in environmental engineering from Thailand and a master's in climate change from the Australian National University as well. And finally, we have Mr. Mani Prasad Nirola, who is the Deputy Chief Biodiversity Officer at the National Biodiversity Center, MOAF. He specifically looks after the bioprospecting and ABS program since January 2010. This program envisions to derive tangible benefit from Bhutan's rich biodiversity and associated traditional knowledge for the enhancement of conservation and rural livelihood and the promotion of people's leadership in conservation. Mr. Nirola has graduated with a BSc in forestry from the Dr. Y.S. Parmar University of Horticulture and Forestry in HP, India in 2009, and also has an MSc in mountain forestry from the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences from Vienna, Australia in 2016. So those are all the speakers. Welcome. I will direct you questions one by one. And if you do need to use a slide, you can use them, or please ask our tech support for more help. So my first question goes to Mr. Pema Baza. So we heard a lot about the landscape approach today, and I think there must be people in the audience who are hearing it for the first time, and some of us who have heard it but do not fully comprehend the meaning of it. So from your work as the project manager for NAPA 3 project, could you please explain a little bit in more detail what landscape approach means, how and to what extent it is being implemented in the Bhutanese context, and how it relates to biodiversity conservation and sustainable development? Over to you, Mr. Pema Baza.
Thank you. Thank you, Pema, for this wonderful introduction, and of course, inviting me and my team over to this very important national dialogue on community-based landscape management. And I take this opportunity to thank my colleagues at UNDP, colleagues at Bhutan Ecological Society, other panel members, my panel members for this session, Mr. Mani and Mrs. Sonam. Perhaps I'm meeting Mr. Mani for the first time, I guess. So Sonam and we have to work together. As Emma mentioned, I think by this time, because we had a lot of speakers and presentation before this session, I would imagine most of us will, even if you're new to the concept of integrated landscape management, I would imagine most of us would have a fair idea of what landscape management means. I'll answer this question purely from the perspective and my engagement with Napa 3 project. As then introduce my project. My project is implemented on the principles of integrated landscape management. So, as you know, when you talk about landscape management, the first thing that comes to our mind is this general physical boundary, geographical boundary of what a landscape is. So every time I have this meeting with my counterparts, my project implementing partners, I make a concerted effort to do a presentation on what ILM is, because this is the foundation of our project. So oftentimes I come across this very glaring situation wherein people will still be not convinced of this overall idea of what integrated landscape management, but be confined to the traditional practice of landscape management. Especially they would understand in terms of sustainable land management, integrated watershed management, etc. But I would like to take you away from this traditional definition of what a landscape management means. I think for most of us, especially in the governance sector, in the policy circle, in the planning circle, we tend to understand integrated landscape management in a particular sector. For instance, we talk about agriculture, land development, we talk about sustainable land management. In water sector, we talk about integrated watershed management, etc. But what Napa 3 does is a little different from what the traditional practice has been. But nevertheless, I would like to again place in the report and acknowledge the past Napa 2 Napa projects, especially Napa 1 and Napa 2. And Napa 3 is an offshoot of the experiences and the wonderful job that Sonam and the team did in Napa 2. Then I don't know, Napa 1, maybe it's taken my NCT somewhere. So pardon me for that and forgive me for that. So Napa 3, what we do is, just to give you a perspective of what Napa 3 does is, at the heart of our project is biodiversity conservation. So I always tell my colleagues that we have to acknowledge the fact that life sources, form of life sources in biodiversity conservation, whether you like it or not. It's the only sustainable solution to climate change and livelihoods, sustainable livelihoods, biodiversity conservation. So that's why at the heart of our project is biodiversity conservation. So anchored on biodiversity conservation, we have other forms of livelihood interventions, especially first one is we are focusing on this enabling environment to pursue ILM in the policy circle, in the governance circle, in the program circle, in the institutional circle. So the second one is we are making this concerted effort for the first time perhaps in Bhutan to embrace governance structure in the biological corridors, especially biological corridor number 1, 2, 4, and 8. And third one is on this climate resilient community livelihoods. And there, what we are doing is we're doing intervention through sustainable land management, climate resilient irrigation schemes, climate resilient crop varieties, marketing infrastructure. And for the first time, perhaps I would say, as far as I'm concerned, we are bringing in brown sector into the integration of integrated landscape management. Traditionally, when we talk about integrated landscape management approach, we have been focusing on RNS sector because RNS sector is structured in such a way that it has this conducive conditions, institutional arrangement to pursue ILM in true spirit, policies and principles. But if you look at Napa, we will brought in the brown sector. So brown sector meaning we have brought in the Ministry of Works and Human Settlements to build climate resilient road infrastructure. So when you presented the portfolio of SGP projects in the East, Basangwa was saying they had to redo the road because it was damaged. This is the condition everywhere in Bhutan. We have a wide range of networks of 1,400 kilometers of farm roads. But this is all in shambles because we did build it incorporating the climate resilient features. So this is what integrated landscape management means from the perspective of Napa 3. But again, I would like to place on the record here that I would like to draw attention of all the participants here, my panel members here, and my colleagues here, to distinguish ourselves from this traditional style of implementing projects on traditional definition of integrated landscape management, and to incorporate the wider definition and the much sought after definition of integrated landscape management. There are multiple benefits which I would share as we go on progressing. And coming to the second point of how we take on this integrated landscape management of biodiversity conservation and for sustainable development goals. I said in front of the our project is focused on biodiversity conservation. This is at the center of our project. So we don't make trade-offs if there is loss to biodiversity conservation. For instance, just to give you a snapshot of what's happening all over right now. In Nubila, this is a project landscape. It is one of the tiger hotspots. You must have read time and again that there's a lot of cattle depredation by tigers there. But for us, tigers are important for conservation because these are the umbrella species which sustains the whole ecosystem food chain. So we have no two ways about not letting the tigers live in there. But again, you have to think about how we come to the rescue of the communities who have lost their livelihood and livestock to tigers. So we are bringing intervention in partnership with the Bhutan Tiger Center and Department of Forest and Park Services. This is what we see when we talk about in integrated landscape management. So we have to look at the broader perspective of how we sustain this whole ecosystem of livelihood and life sources. So I'll stop it here, but thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Pemabaza. I think that thank you for enlightening us on landscape approach and for, I think, highlighting that you have to get out of the silos of sectoral sort of approaches or thinking about landscape in sectoral perspective. I think that's one of the crux. And I've also read that similar to the brown sector, even ecotourism, for example, or tourism in general can be a part of a landscape approach. So thank you so much for that. My next question is for Ms. Sonamda. So as the focal person from Bhutan for the Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD, can you tell us a little bit about what that is and how it is relevant for Bhutan and what national targets Bhutan is pursuing as a party to CBD?
Thank you, Pam. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to the Bhutan Ecological Society for giving us this platform, especially for me to have to answer this question on Convention on Biological Diversity, because we try very hard to give advocacy on this, and this is a very good platform. So because this is a little technical, I do have about 2 or 3 slides if I can share that. So I will just take a few minutes to share my slides with yes, sorry, that was my director. Okay, anyway, so let me continue. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, yes, now we can see your screen.
Okay, just give me a minute. Okay. Yeah, so I always like to start with this slide because often a lot of us have this misconception of only understanding biodiversity as just plants and animals. So of course, it does include the varieties of plants and animals and microorganisms, but it goes beyond that. We are also talking about the variety of ecosystems. It could be forest ecosystems, the river ecosystem, even the agricultural landscape is considered an ecosystem. And then of course, the genetic differences within the species and how these 3 interact with each other. So in a nutshell, it's a whole lot of, I mean, almost everything that you could possibly think of that is covered by biodiversity. So having explained what biological diversity means, a little bit on the Convention on Biological Diversity. So I think a lot of us are familiar with the Rio Earth Summit, which happened in 1992, where the multilateral environment agreements were open for signature, and CBD was one of them. And then the CBD itself, because they had enough signatories by then, opened up and entered into force by 1993. Then along the way, over the course of time, during the implementation of the convention, there were a lot of issues that also need to be addressed. And so they came up with additional protocols. One of them is the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety, which is the safe handling of living modified organisms. And then one on the access to genetic resources and the fair and equitable sharing of benefits. So there are other protocols as well under this convention, but I'm only focusing on these 2 because Bhutan is party to also these protocols. So overall, we have the convention and the various protocols, which again report back to the convention for the implementation of the objectives of the convention. Now, just to give a little bit of national context, Bhutan signed the Convention on Biological Diversity in 1992, and the National Environment Commission is the focal point for the CBD. We have ratified the convention in 1995. And then in 2002, we ratified the Cartagena Protocol, and NEC as the focal point for CBD, then designated BAFRA as the rightful agency for carrying the works of the Cartagena Protocol. And again, in 2016, the NEC has designated the National Biodiversity Center as the competent authority for the Nagoya Protocol. So you have NBC, BAFRA, and NEC. So the NBC and NBC and BAFRA also have to report back to NEC in terms of implementing the various objectives of the convention. So to answer I think that's pretty much what the CBD is all about in a nutshell. Of course, it goes much beyond that, but given the time limit, I'll stick to that. And your second question in terms of how relevant is it to Bhutan and what are the targets? If you look at the objectives of the convention, it's the conservation of biological diversity, the sustainable use of the biological diversity, and the fair and equitable sharing of benefits coming out of the genetic resources. So I think for Bhutan, it's very much relevant. We do, I think most of our plans and activities do gear up and is always in line and in sync with biodiversity management. And in fact, the national strategies are reflected through our National Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plan, the NBSAPs, which I think Mani is probably going to talk about later. But what I'll probably end here by saying is that because it's such a diverse issue, and it's also relevant to everyone, it's not just the government agencies that have to be working towards meeting the targets of the convention or the national goals and things, but it's a whole of society approach, as we have been hearing. So we are looking at private sector, we're looking at civil society organization, the local communities, and even an individual, because we're all dependent on biological diversity. We do make use of biological diversity. And I think it is, we should be part and be responsible for managing biological diversity. So that's what I would like to end here with them.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sonam, for explaining a little bit about CBD and also how we are all, I think, responsible to conserve out the biodiversity. So let's move on a little bit from the international view to how biodiversity conservation works at the national and subnational level. And as Ms. Sonam just mentioned, NBC is one big organization, entity in Bhutan that is taking care of national biodiversity strategies. So my next question is for Mr. Mani. Could you explain to us a little bit about what is called the National Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plans, or NBSAP, and to what extent are they integrated into our national and local development plans, such as the 12 5-year plans? Also, if you could highlight a little bit on how local governments and rural communities are participating towards the objectives and goals of the national biodiversity strategies and action plans. Sorry, I think you're muted, Mr. Mani. We can't hear you. I think you're still on mute. We still can't hear you, Mr. Mani. Perhaps we can just take the next question, and Mr. Mani will come back to you while you maybe figure out your sound. So my next question is back to Mr. Pemambaza. So you told us a little bit about the landscape approach and what NAPA 3 is doing. From your work so far, can you tell us a little bit about, what are some of the critical considerations to be made in mainstreaming and implementing landscapes approach in Bhutan? Because with this panel, we really want to get into how we can mainstream and upscale such ideas. So what are some main considerations and what are some challenges and opportunities for adopting and upscaling and mainstreaming the landscape approach?
Thank you, Pema, for the question. Before I delve into this, take you through the journey of how what critical considerations we to meet in integrating a landscape approach. I'd like to highlight some of the challenges that is there in integrating ILM into policy and government circle. So at a very basic level, I think we have to push on a very aggressive policy program on what integrated landscape management means, the importance of integrated landscape management. As Sonam mentioned, we need a platform like this where we can share experiences, talk about it so that people get to understand the terms, the terminologies, concepts, and then as we begin to use in everyday, language, everyday terminology, and I think then people will understand what it is. But again, just to give you an overview of what's happening in Bhutan, we have been practicing integrated landscape management, but because we didn't use the term, we are not aware of it. For instance, SCP is doing project on integrated landscape management, NAPA 3 is doing, WWF is doing. In fact, the whole R&R sector is on integrated landscape approach. But because we use this term, we are not aware that we have been practicing this in the policy and planning circle. So the first thing is that we have to make use of the term again and again, so that people get familiar with it. So now coming to some of the critical considerations, some of the challenges is that first there has to be this what you call them, acknowledgement and willingness from the leadership and the leadership on this, especially institutions such as mine or ours, in a sense, GNH Commission as the Central Coordinating Planning Agency should take the lead. So and then sectors such as bigger sectors such as Ministry of Agriculture and Forest, they play a very critical role in ensuring that this is put into practice. Actually, as per literature, there are three considerations that you have to meet when you mainstream integrated landscape management. First is the governance structure. Now, of course, that covers the policy, the leadership, and the second one is the marketing. So there has to be people who are willing to take this up. For instance, again coming back to NAPA 3 and some other projects such as the RED Plus, what we're doing is we are making the communities partners in conservation through sharing benefits of some protection. For instance, especially through payment for ecosystem services in water. So from NAPA 2, they did this Yakubang payment for ecosystem services in Mongolia. Now, when NAPA 3 came in, that agreement was over. What NAPA 3 did was we renewed the payment for ecosystem services in Yakubang. So these are the kind of tangible benefits that you have to give to the communities and show through examples of how you derive benefits out of ecosystem services. If you protect ecosystem services, although the it is very, very low, it still sets the context and it gets the journey going. So these are the initiatives that the government has to recognize, not just as one-time investment, but as sustainable solutions. I would say this first thing is that you have to have the governance structure, right? And there has to be leadership, there has to be policies and institutions, at least so that we understand this and then acknowledge this. The second is the market for this. And third is finance. Of course, without finance, there is nothing that we can do. But nevertheless, we are very fortunate to have lots of vertical funds that's coming through, especially global environment facilities, the Green Climate Fund, and some other funds in our multinational bilateral partners. So there is this avenues for us to source finance, especially if you climate finance. And then I would say, as I wanted to reiterate again that we have to have this break out of the silo mentality and build on this and acknowledge the benefits of collaborating and then working together. So just to give you a snapshot of how we did this in the 12-5 plan, you might be aware that 12-5 plan, the principles of 12-5 plan is on the CCC, collaboration, coordination, consolidation. Just we have put in the context of CCC, and we didn't use it in terms of ILM. We missed the board level. So if you look at it, the 12-5 plan, we talk about CCC. It's in a sense it's talking about integrated landscape management. But because within the policy circle, within the planning circles, like people like us, we didn't understand what integrated landscape management is and how it is not very different from the CCC we used in the 12-5 plan. I think we have got entirely. I mean, we missed the opportunity to take it in a very full bloom and in a very rigorous manner. So I would say the first thing is awareness. Then, of course, we have to keep on talking about it and then create forums like this multi-sectoral forums where people can come together, share their ideas, and then even want to accept about it. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Mr. Panobaza, for highlighting some of the critical challenges as well as what are the opportunities and the, I would say, non-negotiables to go forward with this. So I think we'll come back to Mr. Mani if your audio is working now. So once again, the question was about the NBSAPs, the Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plans, and to what extent they have been integrated in the 12-5-year plan, and also how are local government and communities participating towards the NBSAPs.
Lasla, can you hear us? Hear me? Okay, sorry for the technical glitches. Like earlier panelist, let me also join organizer Bhutan Ecological Society for having National Biodiversity Center as one of the panelists. Now coming back to your question about NBSAP, I'm pretty sure that almost all of the panelists and the online viewer must be aware of what is NBSAP. Basically, when we talk about NBSAP, NBSAP is National Biodiversity and Strategy Action Plan, and it is a national version of global biodiversity targets developed from the period of 2011 to 2020 for the period of 10 years. Basically, it was guided by the global biodiversity targets, also known as IG targets. But it is not only based on the global priorities, but it is based on our national priorities and local priorities, also the issues that are relevant to us. And in the national biodiversity document, we have around, we have 20 targets that are basically adopted from the IG target, but basically adopted based on the national and local priorities. It is considered as a national document that guides biodiversity conservation in the country. And you must be aware that the first biodiversity action plan was developed in 1997, and as of now we have developed around four NBSAPs. And like when you might have seen the NBSAP document. When you look at the NBSAP document, you might have seen that all the targets are those which are feasible for implementation. Those which are desirable and wishful are not really included in the NBSAP documentation. And you may also perceive that we have adopted the concept of think globally and act locally, and also learning by doing. Now, coming back to your second question, how it has been mainstreamed into the national policy and planning. The main thing is you must have also seen that many of the targets and actions that has been outlined in the NBSAP document has already been mainstreaming into the national policy and planning, especially the 11th 5-year plan and 12th 5-year plan. 11th 5-year plan because the NBSAP and the 11th 5-year plan was developed in parallel, and 12th 5-year plan because by then the NBSAP document was already in place. And now when we really say about how it has been mainstream, you may not see direct word that is being in the document, but if you really dwell into it, you may see that a lot of the NBSAP target had already been integrated into sectoral plans. And this has happened mainly because the NBSAP document the NBSAP document was not developed in isolation or in silo. And for the very first time, the document was developed by the National Task Force, comprising of the stakeholders, those who are working in the biodiversity conservation of the country. And why we have adopted this principle of National Task Force? Mainly to strengthen the capacity, national capacity. Second thing, two is mainstreaming. And third one is to promote the ownership of this NBSAP document and like mainstream in their sectoral plans. And in the country like us and in Bhutanese setting, you know, those people who are like involved in developing the NBSAP are also involved in developing their sectoral plans and policies. That way, it was sort of a blessing in disguise, you know, because same people are involved in developing both the document. Now, if I may give like some of the example how it has been mainstreamed in the at a national level, you might have seen that, especially in the case of Department of Forests, around 63 of NBSAP targets have been mainstreamed in their biodiversity targets, especially in 12 5-year plan. You know, so it is quite interesting to see that some of the policy, for example, food and nutrient security policy of Bhutan, a draft livestock development of policy, a policy of Bhutan, ABS policy of Bhutan also have drawn some of the policy statements from the National Biodiversity document. And Ministry of Agriculture recently launched RNR Strategy 2040. And you might have seen that some of or majority of the target in that strategy document were also drawn from NBSAP. And you may also like have heard about National Committee for Biodiversity. It is a like apex body formed after the recommendation of the NBSAP, and this committee is chaired by the Secretary of National Environment Commission, Session. Now, you may have also like seen that majority of biodiversity target in Bhutan for life is also like were also drawn from NBSAP INLAC. Now, with regard to participation of local government and rural communities, so if I give some of the example, the target 17 of National Biodiversity and Strategy Plan, NBSAP, is about documentation of traditional knowledge. And I'm very happy to mention here that local government and rural community have taken this very positively. And now local communities are very much aware of the importance of traditional knowledge, why the documentation has to be done, and what are the ensuing benefits arising from their utilization. So this was one of the positive session. And with regard to the conservation and preservation of native agrobiodiversity, NBC works closely with ZONCACs, RNR's research centers, and extension and rural community in conserving native traditional crops and livestock breeds. You might have like heard, okay, so I'm almost done.
Ceremony. Less.
I'm almost done. You might also have heard about community seed banks. It was already presented by our earlier presenter. NBC has supported, with the support of ZONCAC and RNR Center, many community seed banks, and community themselves are managing these seed banks. And one interesting thing was like some of the ZONCACs have integrated this biodiversity as their mission document. For example, in case of Bumthang, one of the 4 missions of Bumthang ZONCAC is to preserve and protect rich biodiversity of the country. Personally, I feel it is not important for local government and communities to have a specific biodiversity target, but these concepts should be integrated in their other program. This we can see from example of community seed banks, community-based natural resource management groups, you know, and community-based non-wood forest management group. So these are directly or indirectly contributing to conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. Thank you.
I think because it's related to what you just said, I'll stay on to you and then go to the other speakers. You mentioned that the community seed bank, as well as some other ways that the communities are adopting biodiversity conservation into their plans and actions. But then I think during our community consultations of the SGP project beneficiaries in Gamri watershed, as well as Lower Manas Basin, what we found was that traditional knowledge of practices, farming practices, as well as local varieties of crops and livestock were actually diminishing rapidly. And yet communities, as you mentioned, are the main custodians as well of traditional knowledge about their local landscape. So what is happening there, and also what can we do to improve the retention of such local knowledges and build maybe capacity of the local community to preserve their local ecosystems?
Lasla, thank you very much for the question, and you're very right. Traditional knowledge and local varieties of crops and traditional breeds, they are like diminishing at an unprecedented rate. And when we talk about traditional knowledge, it is a dying art and mostly uncodified, not written, and it is passed down from generation to generation, from parents to children and from teacher to apprentice. And it is very much evident that this traditional knowledge is being now fading away, mainly because of the socio-economic development and modern education. And when we talk about traditional knowledge, it is very broad. The traditional knowledge encompasses traditional cultural expressions, soarikpa, local healing practices, traditional farming system, land, soil and nutrient management, customary practices for natural resource management. It is very broad, and now it is very important to really recognize this traditional knowledge, document, and try to monetize, incentivize this traditional knowledge. And you might have also seen that Biodiversity Act of Bhutan 2003 and ABS policy of Bhutan recognizes local communities as the holder of traditional knowledge. And if somebody wants to access this traditional knowledge, prior informed consent has to be obtained from the holder of traditional knowledge. And any ensuing benefits arising from the utilization of the traditional knowledge should benefit them. Now, to improve retention of local varieties of crops and livestock breed, as well as the traditional knowledge, practical approach is to make retention valuable and profitable. Just building capacity and short-term incentives won't work and are not suitable. We need to convert local knowledge into monetary and non-monetary benefits for the holder of traditional knowledge, and that is exactly what NBC is doing. We are documenting traditional knowledge with the rightful holder of the traditional knowledge through proper procedures, and this is a work in progress. And at the end, we try to incentivize the holder of the traditional knowledge. And this UNDP, we have colleagues from UNDP SGP program here. We have supported a community in Lokchina, a gingiber kasumunar, a local mountain ginger, which used to be traditionally used by the local communities out there in treating joints and muscle pain, is now a commercial product in the name of Jinor. And now local communities are making some sort of alternative income from this venture. And this project is basically supported, technically supported by NBC, and to some extent financially supported by a small grant program of UNDP and through the Nagoya Protocol Implementation Fund project. Similarly, in terms of native crops, several on-farm groups have been formed in Bumtang, Trasi Yangsi, Mongor, etc. In native livestock conservation, several groups, especially for Ifa, Ibja, Nublang, these are traditional name of the livestock, have been formed in different parts of the country to basically conserve the native germplasm on farm. NBC plans to form more groups and build their capacities in value addition through processing, labeling, etc. NBC also, through certain programs, plans to reintroduce those native germplasm which are in the National Gene Bank but have not been lost from the farm. We are trying to reintroduce these things through the cost-sharing mechanism of the ministry. Recently, ministry launched a cost-sharing mechanism, and through this, we are exploring how we can incentivize local communities who are into conserving native germplasm of the country. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. I think I'm being flagged that we're running out of time. I mean, not out of time, but we have to move a little quicker. So my next question, I think we have talked a little bit about local communities and the national biodiversity plans and actions. And I would like to now move back to a little bit of what we are here to do, which is talk about landscape approach and how it relates to the global biodiversity framework as well. So my next question is to Ms. Sonam again. So how should the landscape approach that we've discussed all this morning be incorporated into the post-2020 global biodiversity framework? And also that in light of the application of how it's related to the national biodiversity plans and framework for Bhutan as well. And also how can this incorporation and application of the landscape approach within the national biodiversity actions advance sort of the achievement of sustainable development goals? I know it's a heavy question, so I hope you got that.
Yeah, thanks, Pam. I think it helps that Mr. Sering Phunso and Mani has already given a bit of context, talking about the GBF and the IT targets, but I'll just reiterate a little bit before I answer your question on how the landscape approach can be incorporated into the global framework. So in 2010, the members of the convention had adopted this strategic plan for biodiversity, which included the 20 IT targets that Mani mentioned earlier for a 10-year period from 2011 until 2020. And last year in 2020, they took stock of the progress made so far, and the results were really not up to the mark. I think most of the targets were almost partially or to some extent achieved, but not really up to the mark. So now they're moving on to this other framework, which is the post-2020 framework, and we're hoping for better results this time. And the analogy I usually give is that the global biodiversity framework or the post-2020 framework is to the CBD what the Paris Agreement is to the climate change. So it's that level of importance. And so basically it has overall 4 goals in the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, which is geared towards achievement by 2050, the vision of living in harmony with nature, which we've heard a lot about this morning. And then it has these 21 targets that we hope to meet by 2030. So the first draft was shared just last week on 12th of July for the post-2020 framework. So it's available online for anyone who's interested. And if you have some views on it, we are happy to hear from you, the NEC, if you have your own views on the framework itself, because the negotiations for this framework is still ongoing, and it'll be only adopted when the COP happens, which is probably sometime end of the year or early next year. So we still have the opportunity to put in your views. So the framework itself, the goals is targeted at looking at protecting the ecosystems, the species, and the genetic diversity by reducing threats to biodiversity, while at the same time you're ensuring people's needs are met through sustainable use and benefit sharing. And then it talks about what are the tools that can be used, the solutions for implementation and mainstreaming. So I think the landscape approach can probably come in as one of the tools for implementation of the framework itself. That could be at the global level, but of course it's already streamlined in the various targets. So you do not really, if you do not really see the word landscape there, I think it really doesn't matter because it's already streamlined into the various targets. I think what's more important is to have this approach probably in the next NBSAP that you develop, to have it reflected there. And because the national strategies and plans will ultimately lead to the fulfillment of the objective or the framework at the global level. So if you have the landscape approach at the national level, I think that would address the issue of how we would integrate landscape there. The last question on the and how it would advance the achievement of the SDGs. This is my own opinion. I feel the SDG is successful only if it is achieved in its entirety, and not bits and pieces of one goal or the other. So it's the same thing with the landscape approach. You want to balance your environment conservation, you want to balance economic development, and at the same time preserve your culture and tradition. So it has to be, again, achieved in its entirety. So I think the landscape approach does that, and that's how ultimately you would also be moving towards achieving your SDGs. So I hope I've answered all your questions, Ben.
Yes, Thank you very much. I think that was very succinct. And also thank you for, I think, pointing out that, I think the post-2020 biodiversity framework is very much more at a global level, and that the national biodiversity strategies could actually improve the landscape approach or mainstream that within our national context, which I think is very pertinent. And hopefully that is what will happen as we develop the next NBSOPs. So my next question, I think, will stay with you because we're on the topic of post-2020 biodiversity framework. So in another sort of takeaway from our visits to the project sites of this SGP small grant programs was that we saw a lot of activities related to bamboo plantation, napier grass plantations, terracing, building causeways, as you saw in the morning. And so this has really helped in the management of landslides and some of the environmental challenges in the region where they were implemented. So given the advantage of the landscape approach in terms of disaster risk reduction as well as climate change adaptation within infrastructure, built infrastructure, what needs to be incorporated into the post-2020 biodiversity framework to galvanize concrete actions towards this? And also what are steps we can also take in Bhutan, or maybe we are already taking in Bhutan, to use such an approach for disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation?
Thanks, Pam. So actually the post-2020 framework already touches upon these integration and the interaction among the different multilateral environments, which touches upon issues of climate change, disaster, and in fact calls it one of the enabling conditions that we all must work together on this. And then particularly there are also very specific targets. I think you mentioned bamboo plantation and some tree plantation, which in the climate world is called nature-based solutions or ecosystem-based adaptation. And this again is reflected in the post-2020 framework, where they're trying to link biodiversity to climate change and ask for using such ecosystem-based adaptation approaches. And also specifically, they also talk about, they've given even a figure, which I'm quite surprised at the moment, but I'm sure this will be negotiated later. They have mentioned that they will use nature to at least reduce 10 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year as part of the mitigation initiatives, because as you know, trees play a great role in mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions. So it has to a large extent already integrated the issues of disaster risk reduction and climate change. Now coming to the national level, I think Honorable Lembo has already touched on this in his opening remarks on the national adaptation plans, which the National Environment Commission is currently working on, and we hope to have it by the end of the year. There, it looks at medium and long-term adaptation plans, and we're already discussing all the various impacts on the different sectors, and it does look at adaptation towards disaster, towards biodiversity, and also other sectors that are relevant. So I think we are already on our way to integrating all these issues through the national adaptation plans. Of course, I'm sure there are other initiatives as well, but from what I can think of, at least what NEC is doing right now in collaboration with other sectors is working on the NAPs, which does look at all of these issues in an integrated manner. Thanks, ma'am.
Yes, thank you so much. I think that's a very good insight into what is already being done, and it's good to know that we're already thinking about integrating a lot of these issues together. And for a small country like Bhutan, maybe it's easier to think that way as well. So now let's move on back to Mr. Mani, to a sector which I think is very important, which is agriculture. So a big part of the landscape in Bhutan is protected areas, as we know, with over maybe 50% of the total area protected. However, in rural areas where people live and farm, it's also equally a part of the landscape. And especially many communities are in fact living in the fringes of protected areas, as we know. So how can we use landscape approach in mainstreaming biodiversity into the agriculture and livestock sectors as well?
Lasla, thank you so much. It's very good question, but I may not have a direct answer to it, but maybe my statement would trigger questions later on from the viewers and the panelists. The important thing when we talk about biodiversity is not only those found in wild or in forests. Agriculture and livestock are key component of biodiversity, and wholesome conservation can happen only when we understand this concept. Whether we use landscape approach or community-based approach, understanding and realizing the interconnectedness between different sector of components of biodiversity is important in successful conservation of biodiversity. Now, to answer your question about mainstreaming, sometimes mainstreaming is a broad, very broad concept, and sometimes it is quite vague also. But nevertheless, to answer your question of using landscape approach in biodiversity conservation, I would still emphasize that any plans for biodiversity conservation should be mindful of its positive and negative impacts and on agriculture and vice versa. Only a win-win situation for all sectors and components of biodiversity would result into a successful conservation of biodiversity and mainstreaming. So with this, maybe we need to find a middle path, or maybe some sort of living in harmony with nature. So this sort of concept should be adopted for this win-win situation. Thank you very much. So maybe later on when we have a discussion, maybe other panelists will also add to this question. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, La. Let me get back to Mr. Pema Baza on especially, I think one thing that we do, once we do something, it's always important to monitor and measure the effectiveness. And in some of the basic research I've done, I've understood that monitoring, reporting, and evaluation can be quite complicated when it comes to using ecosystem-based or landscape approach, as opposed to just counting the number of species as biodiversity being conserved. So can you elaborate a little bit on the challenges on monitoring and how it may be improved in terms of landscape approach, and maybe from the NAPA perspective as well, how you're approaching monitoring in your project, Les?
Thank you. So I think this is the last question for the panelists, and we wrap up with this very important discussion on monitoring evaluation. As you rightly put, on projects such as ours or programs such as ours, which is based on integrated landscape approach or ecosystem-based planning, monitoring is very, very difficult. In a sense, because although we do it on an integrated landscape approach, ecosystem-based approach, the programmatic at the programmatic level, what you do is still activity-based. So, in my personal opinion, having worked in upstream for almost 3 years, monitoring is not an issue because we still follow the traditional approach of going activity-wise. But however, in my personal opinion, and having worked, worked on monitoring evaluation for this project, I feel it's very important to have our first basic framework right before we set out on this monitoring evaluation journey. When I talk about basic framework right, I think the first, the theory of change has to be right. In this resource-based management language, I'm using some resource-based management language where you say theory of change has to be right and monitoring evaluation framework has to be right. And then if you look at how NAPA 3 has structured it in our monitoring evaluation framework is, although we have no intervention, some of the key biodiversity areas, we still have targets that we have to measure. For instance, again, coming back to the keystone species and umbrella species, we still have to keep in track a number of tigers, snow leopards, musk deer, etc. Although we don't have direct intervention, that's how we ensure that we are successful in implementing this project on the principles of ILM. Although monitoring is important, I would still like to emphasize that we have to build the capacity of evaluation. If you have this capacity of evaluation, then we have this holistic picture of where we're getting right and wrong. Unless we have this capacity and institutions in place, that takes this role of evaluation very seriously. I think we have, I would say, although we could do some things on part of monitoring, evaluation play a very important role. So for that, we have to build capacities within the institutions, within the CES, such as Bhutan Evaluation Society, within the government structure systems. Then again, I would like to emphasize the role of the Royal Audit Authority. Royal Audit Authority, although it is not more in terms of monitoring evaluation, they do this performance-based evaluation. So project like ours, they do this performance evaluation, which is gives us a very good feedback on the areas that are going right and areas that are going wrong. So these are the institutional and policy mechanisms that has to be put in place. Again, I would like to reiterate that before we delve on monitoring evaluation, I think the first thing that we need to get right is planning. For instance, we look at how the planning structure has changed in the 12-5-year plan. If you look at local governance planning, the forestry sector has been taken out. This is a very important component when you talk about landscape approach or integrated landscape approach, ecosystem approach. If you take out this whole chunk of life-giving sources from a sector that's doing planning for the whole community, then there is this missing link. The link has to already been cut off. Maybe for some reasons, I don't know, maybe there was some vision, some rationale behind why we took our forestry sector from the local government, especially local governments in the context of Zongkhokla. So they have been cut out totally, and now they're put in the central agency of Department of Forest and Park Services. The planning happens in isolation because the governance structure didn't enable us to do it. Until 12-5-year plan, the forestry sector was with the local governments under the governance of the Zongkhok administration. That time, at least there was an opportunity, and the ecosystem, governance ecosystem in place that would foster it. Now again, going forward, maybe 13-5-year plan, we might have a think about how we look at the governance structure and the planning structure at the local government level. However, at the national level, as my two colleagues, Mani and Sonam said, we have all these conventions, all the national strategy documents that takes care at the national level. But again, think global, act local. That's where local governments play a very critical role in ensuring that all these things happen. So I would like to reiterate, first, we need to get the planning framework right. Second, the governance structure right. And third, we have to focus on evaluation and strengthening the institutions' capacity. That's I'll stop here. Thank you, Pema.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Pemambas. I think that was a very good rounding up of this panel session before we move on to the questions. And I especially resonate when you say that the local communities maybe do not have enough governance over their local ecosystems. And that seemed to be the case and confirmed by our visits to the project sites as well. So I think we have exhausted the time allotted to us, but I thought maybe we'll take one question if any participants have any questions to ask. You can either raise your hand and then someone will unmute you, or you can, write in the comment section. Any questions? And if my colleagues could please take a look on the questions chat boxes. Any questions from the audience? I think we just have one question coming in, which it's an open question to anyone. How can we overcome the problems related to climate change faced by farmers? I mean, that's a very broad question. Would anyone like to answer that? How can we help farmers? Sorry, we have another question here. Maybe we'll take that instead because this is a little less broad. What can be done to address the critical gaps and barriers arising from individual sectoral-based approach of planning and pursuing landscape objectives? How can we ensure and what level of actions are needed to synergize across sectors, programs, geographical boundaries that are so multifunctional so that multifunctional objectives and enhance cross-sectoral coordination. So I think it's more in terms of how can we rise above the critical barriers that Mr. Pemambas mentioned earlier of sectoral plannings and ensure that there is coherence and how can we move towards that? Maybe I don't know if Mr. Pema would like to take that question or any other panelists if you have opinions on that. What would be the starting point for moving towards maybe a more landscape-based approach?
I think, Pem, I gave my thoughts on it. I would like to offer this opportunity to either Manisa or Sonam, if you would like to take this opportunity. If not, then I'll come in.
Pem, I think that's the answer we are all looking for, actually. But yeah, I think this is one of the challenges that is a recurrent challenge that keeps coming up. And I think Pema's already mentioned a lot of issues that surrounds it. Of course, discussions such as this is important, and then having consultations, but also I think after the discussions and consultations, it's the implementation that's more important, because often we do agree to each other during consultations, but then we go back and then start doing our own stuff and forget about, what we have discussed earlier and how we were planning to work together. So my emphasis would be more on follow through on what we've discussed and try and implement what we have agreed or recommended to each other.
Yes, thank you, La. Mr. Mani, would you like to add something?
Laslat, I don't have the direct answer to your second question, but I would like to also reiterate to what Pema sir and Madam Sonam mentioned. Working in silo and territorial sort of thinking won't work. Really, the consultation and thinking for the greater goal is important in any planning and implementation process. But with regard to your first question regarding the agriculture and climate change, National Biodiversity Center, you might have heard that National Biodiversity Center is promoting the indigenousness. The one thing, promotion of and preservation of traditional knowledge. Second thing is preservation and promotion of traditional crops and livestock breeds. So in terms of resilient to climate change, we have also implemented certain projects called evolutionary plant breeding, neglected and underutilized crops. So our main hope is those traditional crops, for example, they may not have better yield than as compared to the improved one, but they are resilient to climate change. So okay, so to combat and to really adapt to the climate change, so we are promoting the cultivation of this native and resilient crop varieties on their farm through certain incentive-based and a cost-sharing mechanism. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I think I would like to stop here because we are running a little over time. But thank you very much for our panelists for a very, I think, enlightening discussion. I hope the rest of the audience watching also learned a little bit more today being in this panel. This panel, as I mentioned at the beginning, was to look at how landscape approach can be integrated a little beyond the SGB projects. And we've heard a lot of what is already being done, which I think is very good, but also some of the things that needs to be done further. And I hope we can continue this discussion. I would just like to mention that we haven't discussed financing so much because the next panel is that. So now I'll pass on to Kitso for introduction of the next panel. Thank you very much, all panelists. And we'll come back to some audience key takeaways at the end of the second panel. So I hope we can also discuss some ideas further than that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pam, and the panel speakers, and for the enlightening and lively discussions. Next up, I'm delighted to invite Ms. Chine Chorin, a social entrepreneur and consultant in climate change and sustainability. She's also a climate reality leader. Ms. Chine will be moderating the second panel session on financing for socio-ecological production landscapes, which will look into the potential and innovative financial mechanisms, public-private partnerships, and other financing models. Over to you.
Good morning and welcome again to everyone joining us. So I'm going to try and keep my speaking time to the minimum. We have heard quite a bit on COMDEKS, the Satoyama Initiative in Bhutan, the landscape approach and insights in biodiversity conservation and sustainable development, and the ways of integrating it into national actions and plans. And I think more importantly, the genesis or the essence of this initiative, which is connecting centuries-old knowledge to current day modern and changing landscape to live in harmony with nature, which has its opportunities and also the tensions that we have heard of so far. This session, we will be talking about financing and more specifically, innovative financing for socio-ecological production landscape. And as we all know, scale and sustainability, as pointed out earlier by Tsering Pinto, of such initiatives is very important, and financial sustainability is also very important to scale such initiatives. And when it comes to financial sustainability of financing, we have to ask the questions where we secure, how we manage the funds, what we finance, why and who we finance, and who has access to those finance and for how long. So you get the picture, the questions and tools and the approaches are endless. And essentially, we have to cut through the noise to get to the heart of it. And this panel will share their thoughts and insights to attempt to assess potential innovative financial mechanisms and approaches that are relevant to Bhutan. I have three experienced gentlemen as the panelists who come from very different but interconnected professional backgrounds. I am just going to state who they are and where they work right now, and I'd like to request maybe Kitso to put their full bio on the chat so that people can read up on it. We have Mr. Nawang Galson. He's the Biofin Coordinator for United Nations Development Program here in Thimphu. We have Dr. Jigvi Tenzin, who is the Deputy Chief Forestry Officer of Watershed Management Division, Department of Forest and Park Services. He's also Bhutan's RED Plus Coordinator. And lastly, we have Mr. Tashi Jamso, the country representative of WWF Bhutan. WWF World Wildlife Fund Bhutan. We'll be following the same time format as the earlier panel. But the session flow is going to be slightly different. I will ask a round of 3 rounds of guiding questions to our speakers to frame the discussions, after which we'll open up to the audience. The 3 speakers will speak to the same guiding questions just because it's financing topic and they can speak from their own respective vantage points to these questions. And these questions are pretty much going to be as inclusive as possible. And I would like to request the speakers to keep your responses maybe to 3 to 4 minutes in your responses. So the first guiding question for the speakers, what does innovative financing mean to you from where you are placed professionally? What do the prospects and the potential look like globally and more specifically for Bhutan? Maybe I'll start with Mr. Nawang and then go with Dr. Jigme and Mr. Tashi. So Nawang, over to you.
Thank you, Chile. Thank you and welcome. Good morning still, everyone. So I think in the morning, we discussed a lot about integrated landscape management, landscape-based approaches. But as you mentioned, finance was not discussed, but we felt the need for finance, especially when we talk about sustainability. And I think it so touched on some of the recommendation and needs from the farmers, the requirement for maintenance funds, entrepreneurship, green markets. So this is where I think we talk about innovative finance. But when we talk about innovative finance, there are some misunderstandings and misconceptions, I think, which we need to clear. I'll just attempt to put my understanding of innovative finance. Innovative finance is not always about replacing or realigning ODAs or grants that we have been dependent on. But innovative finance is about identifying solutions that can actually mobilize new financing for development. And sometimes innovative financing can be more sustainable and have more predictability. And increasingly, we talked about partnerships in this landscape-based approaches. Innovative finance is also about generating a new discourse or new narratives with private sector or non-state actors. I think we'll have separate discussions later on. The other misconception about innovative finance is people think innovative finance is all about raising new finances. Yes, to an extent, innovative finance raises new funding, additionality, but innovative finance is also about optimal use, efficient use of traditional funds or available funds. And here we are talking about effectiveness or aid effectiveness for development. And sometimes when we talk about landscape-based approaches, innovative finance can promote what we require, this whole of society approaches or responses to financing. And then again, when we talk about innovative finance and innovation in general, it's not always about new ideas, breakthrough ideas, or technology or ICT, as many people relate to. It's also about simple ideas that can yield results. It's also about copying from where things have worked from elsewhere, or even looking at our historical trends, right? So this is all about that. Briefly about us, as UNDP, we engage with public and private sector to look at how we align and link up financing to sustainable development goals. We, as you have heard, we support and work with partners in a number of initiatives like environment, climate change, biodiversity, as we are talking today, health, private sector development. So we are interested in financing for development as a whole. So innovative finance is one area where we are interested. And finally, myself, I work as a national biofin coordinator, and I look at biodiversity finance as a means to raise and manage capital using financial or economic instruments or incentives to support biodiversity conservation. And my colleague Tashi, who is a champion of Bhutan for Life, will talk about unique biodiversity finance, Bhutan for Life, which, like, for example, we are working at new generation of projects to look at operationalizing opportunities, again, which we'll talk later. And finally, on the prospects, I think we have a lot to discuss today, but I will just start here and stop here saying that this is the right time. COVID has demanded the conditions for follow-up programming on innovative finance or finance in general. So I really look forward to this very fruitful discussions. Thank you.
Dr. Jigme, I think you have a slide to go with your response.
Thank you. Can you all see my slide?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chinle, and I would like to join our earlier speakers to thank the Bhutan Ecology Society for giving us this opportunity. So to set the context, I'll try to have a short, I'll try to prepare a short structured presentation so as to guide myself so that I don't divert from the topic, and also to help the audience understand well. So to set the context for the foresters, for the Department of Forest, so far we always have been the center of the program has been the communities and the biodiversity. And to set the context, we have been practicing the landscape management for centuries, but why this become suddenly so important is because we are dealing with what we call now the climate change. And as the Honorable Minister mentioned during his keynote address, that now we are seeing a lot of climate change impacts being in the country as well. Like we have changing the rain and snow patterns, then we have drying water sources, receding glaciers, and this will have impact on the communities and on the biodiversity. And to tackle this initiative, this climate change impacts, what we have been promoting internationally at the national is adaptation and mitigation. So adaptation stands for how to adapt towards the impact of climate change, and mitigation basically talks about how to mitigate impact of the climate change, basically how to reduce the carbon dioxide emission into the atmosphere, or to decrease, to sequester more carbon dioxide. And for managing the forest ecosystem is quite important, because the forest kind of provides a buffer. So it's a kind of adaptation for the communities. So in terms of any climate disaster, for landslide or be it any crop disease, anything, forests could be accounted as a buffer. So it's very important that we kind of manage the forests for the adaptation measures for the communities. And if you see here, the forests of Bhutan provides around annually from 394 to around 1 billion worth of ecosystem services. And now when we talk about the adaptation mitigation, that's the things that the important thing that we need to consider is this has to be done together with the communities. And one of the very important topic that we're discussing now is innovative financing, which was also touched earlier. Like there are various means and programs being practiced and also being now kind of promoted in Bhutan. So the one innovative financing that the Department of Forest in partner with the relevant stakeholders is the payment for ecosystem services. So under payment of ecosystem services, we have 4 different types of payment for ecosystem services. One is the watershed protection, whereby the focus is on hydropower and drinking water. So as of now, we have been 4 successful cases of payment for ecosystem services on drinking water, where the local communities are benefited by protecting the watersheds, water sources for the downstream municipal, or be it for industrial or hoteliers, and local communities are being paid. And then we have the scenic beauty, and then biodiversity protection. So kind of payment mechanism that's already in place, like through tourism. And one protected area management that maybe WFCR will talk about, Bhutan for Life, which is kind of for biodiversity protection. And another innovative mechanism that is now picking up at the international level is what we call as the RED Plus mechanism. So this is one mechanism that's picking up at the global level, at the national level, at international level, and this is being recognized by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And this provides an opportunity to reward the communities or the government for conserving the carbon ecosystem, carbon in the soil or in the trees. And through this initiative, which actually tries to stop deforestation, to use the forest sustainably, and to recover degraded land. So the RED Plus, where communities or the governments can be rewarded to conserve the carbon. And for our case, for Bhutan's case, since we have a very good history of forest cover and very less deforestation, the approach that we are taking is to have an innovative financing mechanism in a way where it's based on milestone based. And as we were talking on the community-based initiative that was done through this COMDEKS or through Satoyama Initiative, what I feel is in the coming years or in the future, there's a very good way forward or initiative where we can actually collaborate together. And if you see as part of the National Red Plus Strategic Action Plan, we have 10 policies and measures. And if you look here, there are 3 or 4 policy measures where the local communities will be taken on board. Firstly, is on the promotion of NW-based enterprise, where when we say non-wood forest products, these are basically the non-wood forest products which can be collected from the forest and which are actually harvested by the communities. And the department is promoting this initiative so that the NWFPs can be harvested sustainably. And another PAM's policy measures which can be very much linked to the communities is on ecosystem services that I just mentioned earlier. So you will see that overall we have a program, and we look forward to really take on board the communities and also to upscale the initiative that already been taken through similar initiatives in the past. Thank you, Chinle.
Yes, thank you, Tashi.
Thank you very much, Chile. And I think now it's still morning, 4 minutes or 5 minutes to transition into afternoon. A very good morning to everyone. I should admit here that I was quite mesmerized by the first panel discussion, music to my ears, of cooperation, coordination, coming together. Definitely music to my ears, and I hope for most of us here as well. Having said that, I would also like to thank Chile for having the 3 of us here. Chile is a champion in her own right, in her own field. And at the same time, my 2 colleagues, Ngawang and Jikmi, champions and gurus, I should say, in conservation as well as conservation finance. With this, if you allow me, on behalf of all of us, panelists, moderators, organizations, organizers, everybody out here, I would like to express gratitude to His Majesty, our most beloved Truk Kelpol, our Chusung Summas, the Royal Government of Bhutan, for taking care of us and keeping us safe. For amidst this devastating pandemic, we are safe and we are able to celebrate togetherness through this event. With this, I would also like to thank the Bhutan Ecological Society, UNDP Bhutan, and all collaborators for having WWF Bhutan as part of this panel discussion, and for having, in the field of conservation finance, a wet behind the ears person in me to share my narrow thoughts on such a wide topic, innovative financing. And with this, I would also like to thank all the viewers for taking time to be part of this celebration, a celebration to take one small step towards a giant vision of global sustainable development. No one can be in any doubt that we are in a planetary emergency. The interrelated crisis of biodiversity loss, land degradation, climate change, driven by unsustainable production and consumption, require urgent and immediate global action. A healthy natural environment is at the heart of human development and underpins efforts to achieve all of the sustainable development goals. Beyond this, their intrinsic values like ecosystem provides shelter, food, and medicine, while forests and oceans act as huge carbon sinks. Now, having said that, what does innovative financing mean to me? Financing to me is simply putting resources into a venture, basically money, I guess. And in this case, a venture called conservation of natural systems. But we are facing a planetary emergency, and there is no choice but to invest in ecosystem restoration. I say there is no choice but to invest in ecosystem restoration. But then innovation is not about investing because there is no choice. Innovation in this context, therefore, I personally believe, is about making the choice. It's not about not having a choice, but making the choice. Because nature and ecosystems provides for us. We need to keep it healthy by investing in protecting it to ensure sustainable flow of ecosystem goods and services. Therefore, to a non-finance person like me, innovative financing is basically making that conscious choice to give back to the place we call home, and the rest, green bonds, debt for nature swap, conservation trust funds, are all mechanisms. The potentials and prospects for Bhutan, I guess that's the second part of the question. I personally believe that we are on the right track, not denying that our development approach of gross national happiness has environment conservation as its foundational pillar. We have a constitutional mandate of 70% forest cover supported by enabling policies. But then I guess we got to ask questions. And the question is, are we doing enough? And understanding that most participants today here are from the green sector, I'd rather throw this question at ourselves. Are we, the Green Brigade, doing enough? Doing enough, not in a sense of reforestation, species conservation, watershed management, etc., but doing enough in bringing people and institutions on the other side of the fence to our side. Are we doing that? And that's probably a key question that we need to ask when we talk about innovative financing or being innovative. Therefore, in my personal opinion, we need to be more convincing to drive upskilled investment into environment conservation. Take, for example, we talk about innovative financing. We urge for innovative financing mechanisms. But do we have a proven blueprint to show that nature-based businesses are successful and can be upskilled? Do we have enough data to back up our claim that there are real financial returns from investing in nature-based solutions? These are the questions that I believe that we should ask. The mechanisms for innovative financing, from payment of ecosystem services to green bonds, are proven mechanisms. These are proven mechanisms globally. But understanding this mechanism can be quite a task. As such, personally, I strongly believe that we need to articulate that narrative with financing and financial model at the center of the equation and conservation as a co-benefit. Financing and financial model at the center of the equation and conservation as the co-benefit. Especially if you need to bring stakeholders and not just stakeholders, right holders outside the conservation sector to the discussion platform. And for example, my two colleagues mentioned that I would be talking a lot about Bhutan for Life. I would be refraining myself from talking a lot about Bhutan for Life today. But for now, for this instead, I would like just to give an example. Bhutan for Life to most is only seen and only as a conservation program and an initiative. But in reality, Bhutan for Life is project finance for permanence mechanism. It's an innovative financing mechanism borrowed from the Wall Street, wherein the financial model is the heart of the deal. So with this, Chile, probably maybe I might digress a bit on the key topics because I would like to present some of my personal views on it. So, and I would also like to request all the audience to bear with me. When it comes to these kind of things, I can be a bit emotional. My voices might break at sometimes. So with this, over to you, Chile.
Thank you, Tashi. Well, emotions is always good. IQ is a highly rated intelligence. So they say EQ is more important. So anyhow, thank you very much, Tashi. And I think, the gratitude you expressed is priceless, talking about in the financial language. And thank you for doing that. I think to what Nawang said, innovative financing doesn't necessarily mean new financing or coming up necessarily with new models, but more talking about being efficient with what we have first and rethinking how you implement it. And to Dr. Jigme, he actually gave us specific examples of what his department is doing in terms of the ecosystem, payment for ecosystem services, and how important it is for Bhutan and how we can leverage on that. And of course, Tashi's mention of Bhutan for Life as well. And talking of just now moving to the second guiding question, we've talked about this high level, more at a conceptual, more the big picture. The second question is kind of an attempt to bring it to the ground. So what are the realities in practice? Specifically, what are the challenges we're either experiencing or not seeing and addressing, or even changes required so that Bhutan may get the best of such opportunities? Maybe starting with the most feasible, innovative financing instrument, like we say, some like to say the low-hanging fruits that we could or must pursue. And for this, maybe just to be so that everyone gets the first chance, I will maybe start with Dr. Jigme first, and then followed by followed by Tashi and then Nawang. So Doctor, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. It's a very wonderful question. So, because without understanding the issues and challenges on the ground, we cannot really move forward. So with my little experience on the innovative financing mechanism and on the innovative, on the climate change funds that I've been working on. So for Bhutan, speaking from the perspective for REDD+, one of the challenge we are facing is because we have been very good boys and girls in the past. So the meaning is what I'm trying to say is when we talk about REDD+ financing mechanism, ultimately it boils down to what we call as result-based payments. So when we say result-based payment, it depends on how you set your baseline, both for the emission and for the carbon sequestration. So when we say carbon sequestration, it talks about the forest cover. And through the REDD+ program, we have developed the emission level for the country. So now we can proudly say that by how much we are carbon negative. So initially in the past, we have been basing this on our default values now, but now based on our national data, national circumstances, developed by our national local and local professionals. So we can proudly say how we are doing it now. So on saying that the emission level and the baseline level, the forest cover of Bhutan stands at around 71%. So when we go for result-based financing or innovative financing on REDD+, the first thing they will ask is how much we have increased your forest cover, which is quite difficult for us because we are a developing country and we need to take this middle-class approach. So one challenge that we are facing is how do we tackle this? But there are options and there are strategies. So one strategy that we are putting in place is we will try to manage what we have and maintain what we have. And working with this scenario, we have been in the past, we knew this was going to happen to us. And we always have followed this, what we call as no regret approach. And we have benefited through this RED Plus program. We have already received around $8.6 million till now through RED Plus program. And this has led to development of national capacities, local level capacities. So now the saying that the next challenge we have is now putting all this the documents and the strategies that we have produced through this program, and to put this together, the challenge that we have faced is bringing the stakeholders together. And I think this was also touched again by the first panel members. And the challenge we face, but nevertheless, we are still working on it. And while during the development of this National Red Plus strategy, we tried to consult as much as possible. For example, we covered all the 205 GEOCs, all 20 key stakeholders and all. And we must say that we have a very comprehensive strategy and action plan in place. Now we are translating the strategy and action plan into an investment plan. That's where, again, we are consulting with all relevant stakeholders and communities. So we face challenge, but the challenge we face, but is we are a small country. We know each other well. We know all the organization agencies. For example, I can know almost all the panel members here. So you see that we have a strength in, as our His Majesty says, that strength in the smallness. So we have a strength, and we did face challenges, but we are hoping that we will have the investment plan ready, and this should benefit us, benefit the communities, and benefit our carbon neutrality pledge. Thank you, Madam Chinina. This is from my side.
Thank you, Doctor. Maybe Tashi, you want to go next?
All right, Chile, thank you again. I think interesting questions. As I said earlier, my two colleagues are proficient in the technical arena of conservation and conservation finance. I told myself today I have the liberty not to talk technical, but maybe talk over the air. Having said that, I would also like to put a disclaimer here that whatever I'm going to say next is my personal views and not of my organization's views. It's purely my own. With that, I'll try to put my thought processes into your question, not trying to answer specifically in the structured way it is, but more in a free-flowing way as it comes to my mind. I personally believe that we are still living in the past when it comes to conservation finance. Conservation financing from traditional sources are shrinking while environmental challenges are compounding, meaning investment needs are increasing. But we still choose to believe that conservation finance should primarily be donor assisted. And we choose to believe that. And while we know the reality is not that. But most of us know that this is a fad now. Not exactly a myth, but a fad now. New financial mechanisms have to be pursued, especially through leveraging private, corporate, and community capital. And their capital, both through their investments, but more so through hearing their views, ideas, and very, very important emotions, their emotions. We need to listen to them. Next, I feel that we are going through what I personally like to call, I am a rose, you are a lily syndrome. Conservation organizations have tendency to work in silos. And as such, there are many institutional low-hanging fruits that can be easily resolved. But instead, we protect our own faults. We cannot come together to coordinate more efficiently. And if we cannot come together, how do we get others to value us? And with this, I'll leave this as a question here. But then I would also like to tell, well, roses and lilies, they are both flowers. They are both flowers. And then maybe now I'm, since I said this is a very close topic to my heart and I become emotional, I thought maybe I'll fill in a bit of a light humor, maybe to lighten myself as well as all the audience. So in this spirit of Satoyama Initiative, and I heard Madam Azusa say that Sato means village. And to a lay Bhutanese man or woman, a village is like a gap between two mountains. Now Sato in Zonkala is also a gap. Sato Bemula is a gap. And we need to come together to fill the Sato or the gap between organizations. The Sato di ani subra suku zungchudula ngachiregi organizations ki panagi in terms of coming together. But then how do we bridge the Sato or the gap? How do we get ourselves and our acts together? And what I'm going to say next, probably I'm going to get questions, get criticized, but then I'm a strong believer of a far-fetched idea, of a very far-fetched idea, that the solution to bridge that Sato or that gap is an institutional mechanism at a national level, a Ministry of an Environment. And probably as I speak for myself, I probably might be echoing the sentiments of a lot of our colleagues in the conservation arena. So all we are saying is get us under one big umbrella. We will learn to share. We will learn to mend it. If the umbrella, if something happens to it, we will learn to mend it. And eventually we will embrace it. So with this, probably I'll leave it very short here. Thank you.
Thank you, Tashi. Noam?
Thank you, Tashi. Really, really inspiring. And he's a friend who can really inspire with words, not just philosophical, but also bringing philosophies into practice and making it very practical. So I'm really inspired. So would like to follow up a few things from where Tashi left from my perspectives. I heard somewhere that His Majesty used this word. It seems the fire is spreading, but where is the smoke? So here, I think it seems the fire of innovative finance is spreading, but where is the smoke? We cannot see the smoke. I think the gist, what His Majesty meant was, in our context, the bureaucratic system and the institutional silos that we are talking about, we have managed to build a fail-safe system where people are scared to fail and where people are scared to take risks and where people are scared to innovate, be it because of the system, be it because of lack of innovation. So this is one of the biggest challenge when we talk about innovative finance, because innovative finance usually needs ideas, risk taking, and also upfront costs and other things. So the other thing also is innovative finance takes time. Some may be low hanging, doable, easy, but usually if you want to do breakthrough ideas, you take some time, and then many people lose their patience. So that is one of the challenges that I have faced or witnessed. Tashi talked about a very powerful statement on making a choice, or do we have a choice to invest in nature? Yes, the investments required for nature is a very powerful statement, but the other side of the narrative also is, what are the costs of inaction? What if you don't invest in nature? So that is the biggest narrative that we are missing when we talk about innovative finance or financing for general. The maintenance cost of the natural capital will be quite huge. So in innovative finance and in our biofin term, we also use what we call avoiding future costs. So you build the investment case. If you invest $1 in nature or climate now, how much it will be in terms of saving maintenance costs, or even in terms of avoiding risks. So that narrative is missing, I think. But having said that, Bhutan is already pinned very well in the world map when we talk about innovative finance. We established the first conservation trust fund, which is widely talked about, used thoroughly, and we have a fairly new and revolutionary trust fund, Bhutan for Life, which are again exemplary examples for the outside world, where many people actually look up to Bhutan. And then there are smaller examples with Loden Foundation. I think Chile, you also lead a lot on impact investments. So there is appetite, there is growing thing. And then I think Jigme talked about how we are sitting on this huge natural capital, hungry for green entrepreneurs to come forward. Our Bhutan's ecosystem services, the value is estimates pitching like $15.5 billion, 5 to 7 times of our GDP. But many of the ecosystem services actually flow outside. So how can we monetize using this payment for ecosystem services and other things? So very quickly on the low hanging fruits, we are working closely with Red Plus to look at how we can help build the investment cases. We are working with Tourism Council and WWF and Bhutan for Life to look at ecotourism as a very viable means, mostly through fees, concessions, to bring private sector on board. And finally, now we are trying to localize our tools of innovative finance, where we are trying to look at localizing in COMDEKS landscape through the leadership of GNH. But here, helping the COMDEKS approach mostly through financial landscape. Finally, I think Chile, you talked about this very important question. This question is not asked and not understood by many stakeholders when we talk about financing in general and innovative financing in particular. We have to ask financing for what, financing for who. Then only we can design mechanisms and instruments. Otherwise, if we just design instruments and mechanisms, it becomes very difficult. One to make it work. The other one is implement and then monitor. So those are some of the challenges that I feel. And mostly the challenges I think we will talk about later is capacity, the role of financial institutions, which are limited, but now RMA is coming up with what we call the Green Finance Roadmap, which will be music to ears for conservationists as well as our green entrepreneurs. They're talking about, green markets, green lending, and then bringing the banks and financial sector into play. And then finally, again, private sector. I think we have to talk a lot about it. But you can see there is a mix of a lot of challenges, but huge opportunities. And then in the third question, or maybe a question from audience, I think we can talk about such next steps. Thank you. Thank you, Tile, and thank you, colleagues.
Thank you very much. Such good ideas. And when we talk of innovation, I'm reminded that innovation means change. And sometimes the resistance to change is not necessarily because of progress, it's because of the loss that you're going to face because of the change, whether it's systemic or whether it's your influence or whether it's turf that we've also discussed in the earlier panel session in terms of working across silos or working collaboratively. I just want to highlight a few things. Dr. Jigme's thing on the Red Plus, I think we have this pervasive incentive put in place in terms of the Red Plus and as to how Bhutan can tap into that. But it's good to hear that there are works being done and in the no regrets policy and just the technical side of getting the baseline and everything put in place. Again, this goes to talking about we need to get ourselves ready to know what we want and how we engage to that. And Tashi's suggestion of Ministry of Environment to bring everything together under one umbrella will provide the systemic approach for collaboration, whether individuals or groups like it or not. So that it is, like you said, quite maybe quite controversial, but also maybe quite welcoming for many who necessarily feel this frustration in terms of a siloed approach. And Nawang, your point on bringing the entrepreneurs into the scene or being very entrepreneurial towards this approach is obviously using Tashi's word, music to my ears, because I do work in the entrepreneurship space. And I think there's a huge potential to be more inclusive in this. And talking of inclusivity, I think that leads next to our final guiding question. And that is, are we being inclusive? Who are some actors we should be including that are not in the space at the moment? And when I talk of the space, I mean the innovative financing for biodiversity or the environment. What does it mean for grassroots actors? Again, we talked a lot about Bhutan for Life, the government, but what does it mean for grassroots actors in this space? And how do we make the connection between what's available and how do we bring on board the grassroots actors in this? And what is required in terms of, again, we've already spoken this earlier, but in terms of just even the language skills, because, when we talk of Red Plus, when we talk of community-based development, when you talk of landscape, and these are languages that are not necessarily kind of in the everyday lingo of grassroots actors, but what is required in terms of language, in terms of skills, in terms of capacity, which have been highlighted, but would like, again, maybe our panelists, our speakers, to bring it back into the light in terms from the financing perspective. And maybe we'll start with Dr. Jigme, Mr. Tashi first, and Nawang and Dr. Jigme last. Trying to keep my sequencing right here.
Thank you, Chile. You're doing an excellent job. Like I said before, I would leave the perspectives and ideas and messages on the real issues to my two colleagues. But personally, I believe that people in closest interaction with environment, be it for their livelihood, be it for economic returns, and be it for their sustenance in the future, they should be the center of this discourse, or of the focus. And who are they? And to me, one is definitely our rural population, our farmers, who depend on nature for their livelihood. Two, the private sector, who strives for business benefits out of nature. And three, the young, the youth, the future, for they will be the ones who will have the biggest interaction with nature for their sustenance in the years to come. And personally, I believe these are the three sectors really important to be considered in this equation. I will not focus too much on local government and in the field, but more something to do with more on the private sector here. And I think in order to finance biodiversity through private sector, for example, banks, there is a need to bridge the gap in understanding, approach, philosophy, language, and perception between bankers or the private sector and the conservationists. And I think that is essential. For example, today a banker's perception might allow for investment in brown issues, but more needs to be done to encourage bankers to consider green issues. If we are to attract private finance to biodiversity, we need to connect the language of biodiversity to that of banking. We cannot just talk conservation and expect them to understand that. We need to really think about that language. And at the same time, there is a clear realization that biodiversity conservation will not and cannot be achieved by governments acting alone. The private sector has a pivotal role to play and should be involved, not as a matter of corporate philanthropy. That's where we are very narrow. Private sector, corporations, banks, we always think that from a corporate philanthropy perspective, they should be contributing to environment conservation. That's innovative to a sense. But as a matter of self-interest, it should be a matter of self-interest for this private sector, not as a matter of corporate or private sector philanthropy. Business should profit from sustainable use of biological resources and in the interest of its stakeholders. For example, if you take banks, it has customers, employees, shareholders. Businesses should ensure that its activities do not threaten biodiversity at the same time. So which means we need to really relook at the language. With this, again, I'm sure my colleagues, two colleagues will add better perspectives to these questions. But as Ngaung mentioned, I'm quite philosophical or rather more emotional. I would like to end this answering these questions probably with a story. And since we are talking about Satoyama, I'm inspired by another famous Japanese Zen story. This is about a Japanese master, Zen master, very famous master in the Meiji era, Nani. And during his days as a teacher, he was visited by a university professor who thought he knew so much, well-accomplished university professor. And he was curious about Zen. So he went to Nain and asked, teach me Zen. Being polite, Nain served the professor a cup of tea. And as he poured the cup of tea, the professor's cup became full, but Nain kept on pouring, kept on pouring. As the professor watched the cup overflow, he could no longer contain himself and said, "It is overfull. No more will go in." Nain turned to the professor and said, "Like the cup, you are too full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you Zen unless you empty your cup?" So drawing inspiration from the Zen wisdom, I would like to end answering this question by saying this. Conservationists and conservation organizations should shed our perceptions that the business or the finance sector has no clue about the values of conservation. We should shed that. If you do not that, we will never come to the table together. We will never be able to talk to each other. And at the same time, business and finance sector should get out of thinking that the green sector do not understand finance. And if both parties empties their respective cups, I think progress is quite certain because we are willing to come together in the world. We're willing to talk. The first step of emptying our cups, the first step is emptying our cups. For only if you let go, you will be able to let come. If you cannot let go, you will not be able to let come. The second step is coming together to refill that cup together. And the third, fourth, fifth steps will, I personally believe that it will automatically follow. Thank you, Tile.
Thank you, Tashi. Nawang, you want to give it a go?
Yes, I will keep it brief. Much has been already touched by Tashi. But as Tashi said, business should benefit. This is the narrative we have to use. And I think I used it last month when we talk about climate finance, for example. It is not saying climate finance to maintain carbon neutrality. Carbon neutrality is a country's commitment, but why should local people, why should business people commit to that climate neutrality? Because climate action also provide business opportunities. There are also risks, as I was saying, cost of inaction. So those kind of narratives should be made very powerful so that we bring on board, as Tashi mentioned, private sector, business sector, and rural communities. Just to pick from the morning session, much has already been talked about this post-2020 framework, and I was just looking at it, the latest draft. The final segments talk about increasing financial resources from all sources by at least $200 billion per year, and increasing international financial flows by at least 10 billion per year. And when they talk about finances, in the theory of change, my colleague Singh talked about, they are talking about how we should engage actors beyond governments, which includes NGOs, indigenous peoples and local communities, women's groups, youth, and the business and the finance community. So in the interest of time, as Tashi already talked about, very prominent role of private sector, business sector, young people, and also banks and financial sector, I will just focus on the role of local governments. The history of decentralization is very impressive thanks to our visionary leaders and monarchs. The 12 plan and beyond, I think government is talking about increased fiscal decentralization, which means more resources flowing to the governments. But having said that, if you look at the current capacity and current setting, there are a lot of existing gaps, and we need to strengthen institutional and human capacity at local levels if we are going to talk about financing in general and innovative finance in particular. The civil service ratio between central and the local government is totally mismatched. Of course, if you look at the district civil service, strength, it may be more, but they are like 80% teachers or health workers, and it's finance and planning will be just 1%. So I think we need to do a lot about those. And when we talk about fiscal decentralization, it's a very good and bold move by the government to increase the flows in terms of capital investment. But we must also talk more increasingly about revenue sharing and revenue assignments to local governments. And here I'm talking about a few examples like property taxes, business license fees, and even if you talk about COMDEKS financing, sewerage charges, these have not been revised for a very long time. But again, once it is collected, it goes to the national exchequer. So how do we build the capacity of the local government from this to look through the innovative financing perspective, business perspective, to look at these kind of instruments to increase the financial flows. So there are a lot of opportunities in the local government. Finally, you talked about how do we ensure capacities, skills, language, and all. I just have 3 specific points. I can elaborate later, but one is we have to convene these innovative finance players and supporters from the government, from all of us, through advocacy, research, market intelligence. Tashi talked about data evidences. We must have such kind of policy dialogues, multi-stakeholder platforms that we voice out. Then second step is we catalyze action for support ecosystems. How do we create enabling environment and regulatory reforms? Chile, I think this will be very clear too when you talk about impact investment. How do you make investable ideas through regulatory reforms, and how do we make impact investors hungry? How do we have supportive institutions? And finally, when we talk about green, it's also SDG. How do we mobilize capital for SDGs? We talk about SDG theme bonds, different instruments, impact investing, blended and catalytic financing, which requires upfront costs, but can really generate and unpack big finances. And finally, just as I mentioned, this innovative finance has the potential of promoting this whole of society approach. Traditional finance usually are sector-based, and vertical financing are usually for specific objectives. But if you use innovative finance, there is a potential where we can have this landscape-based approach and whole of society approach. And my final word is my favorite. The golden rule of the galaxy is those who have the goal makes the rule. So this is the importance of finance in any sector. We have to start with basic finance terminology such as budget, and then talk about capacity and sustainability from incentives and all these things. And to end, as Lempo mentioned, think globally, act locally, learning by doing. This is where I think we have to really put our energy into. Thank you so much. I really look forward to the questions. It's really been fascinating session and learning for me.
Thank you, Nawang. Nan, lastly, Dr. Jigme.
Last, thank you. Going straight to your question, that was as Teacher Sir was mentioning earlier, Teacher Sir and Nawang Sir, they already talked a lot about the financing, and they are expert in this because Teacher Sir have been leading the Bhutan for Life initiative, and then Nawang Sir is leading on the biofin, also one of innovative financing mechanism. So going straight on to really focus on the technical part, Teacher Sir was saying, on the RED Plus, are we being inclusive? As I'm concerned, we are supposed to be inclusive. We have the, as per the RED Plus framework, we have the something called safeguards, Cancun safeguards, 7 Cancun safeguards, which has to ensure that every stakeholder, every parties which are impacted by the program or by the natural resources has to be taken on board. And to ensure that we take on board what we are currently working on is we are trying to currently assess the gender and vulnerability groups perspective. So with that, we will be having a gender and a vulnerability action plan. And we also trying to do a stakeholder analysis whereby we would like to mapping all the parties, stakeholders that would be parties, part of the RED Plus program. And we will be working for them something called a capacity need assessment. How capable are they in tackling the program or in implementing the program? And I will only come up with a capacity need assessment plan. And on the language skills and capacity that we were talking about, and the question you put forward, this is also very important because RED Plus program is a new initiative. It's a new initiative, but with a new name. So we have been doing RED Plus program in the past, but the name as RED Plus has been coming as a very new. And as you rightly pointed out, sometimes quite difficult to really explain to communities what RED Plus is. So we try to do it in their language. We try to develop poster in the national language, in all available languages. And but the challenge sometimes we face is we do this with the local leaders, and sometimes this message does not reach to the communities. So next time when you have a new set of local leaders, then you find that they kind of don't have much knowledge on what RED Plus is and all. So now our next program is plan is to how do we ensure that we take on board all this. And talking about grassroots, from the RED Plus perspective, the actor that we see as of now is a community forest. So if you really go into the carbon sequestration, carbon funding and all, we will be starting with the community forestry because this community forest is a well-established group where we can really start the process. And if you go by the experiences in the neighboring countries, community forestry is quite picking up, especially under the RED Plus program. And on the missing actors, one thing that we feel is we are not able to tap in the private sectors as of now. For example, a very good example is on the wood value-based chain. So if you go around, you will see that there's a lot of wood being wasted. And now we are not able to see how can we make sure that we don't waste the wood much. So we have a lot of furniture being imported, but if you look around, we have a lot of wood being wasted. And to take on board the finance, the private sector, we are very looking forward to the 3 banks which are currently being working on to be accredited as an accredited entity to the Green Climate Fund. So once they get accredited, then there would be rooms for the private sector to avail a very low interest loan, and that would be like an interest loan based on the program that we would be promoting. For example, we have a program on the RED Plus program where we like to see innovative on the wood-based industries inside Nalula. And in case there are private sectors who come up with good proposals to how to reduce wood wastage, how to make sure that we use all the wood that is being harvested, that can be really much aligned to our RED Plus program, and then seek for funding proposals. So overall, on the inclusiveness, we have been trying our best to include all the relevant stakeholders, but maybe through our discussion later on, maybe there would be questions saying that we are being left out or we would be included. So definitely that would be a room for we can take forward. So it's not late, because we are still working on the investment plan, and for the investment plan we need to have safeguards in place. Thank you, Madam Chinila.
Thank you all very much. And I think Dr. Jigme's response was very specific and gave really real life examples in terms of what's being done. And I am truly cognizant that inclusivity, as much as it is inclusive, it is also a very difficult job to be very inclusive and to even identify who is not included in that space. So, but I think the private sector came out as a very prominent actor who is not in that space. And it's something maybe that both sides have to meet halfway. The private sector has to acknowledge and understand the the climate or the environment sector. And then the environment sector also has to understand that the private sector, what are their incentives, what are their values, what would incentivize or what would prompt them to be more engaged with the space, and not necessarily kind of stand in our own towers. Like Tashi said, first, I think we both have to empty all the cups and then refill it together to understand. And I like what Nawang said as well in terms of what was it? Those who have the goal makes the rule. So we have to first find out who has the goal and then understand what the rules are being made. You know, and I think we've spoken a lot in terms of the things that needs to come into place, as well as things that are happening. And I don't know how many private sector are in this dialogue right now, but maybe that's also an indication as to how we try and aggressively market the private sector to be part of these such dialogues, as well as ourselves in this space to be engaged with dialogues and activities that are happening in the private sector and also in the banking sector to be to start to begin the work of collaboration. So with that, let me move to the questions, and I have a question here already. And maybe the Kitso and Tenzin, if there's any question from the Facebook Live session, please let us know. I'm not on Facebook Live, so the question here is actually from Pem Lama, and her question is, how may landscape approach manifest in financing? What may be a practical good example of integrated financing mechanism that can take forward the efforts established during the JEF SGP intervention, including maintaining the road, Gabon walls, small-scale community business, etc.? How can we overcome challenges of sustaining benefits beyond project periods? So maybe if I can go to Nawang first, since this is a UNDP project, and just share your thoughts on that. And then maybe if Dr. Jigme and Tashi has some thoughts to add on it.
Thank you, Pem. Very relevant and very good question. And in fact, one of the innovative finance outside green, of course, that we recommended was asset maintenance funds, Because, you know, usually here in our country, we have a lot of infrastructure projects, roads, hospitals, schools. And here we are talking about, you know, SGP funded, walls and even infrastructure. And these are actually the maintenance cost of these projects and infrastructures are often and most of the time, if not all, undervalued and never taken into consideration. And the maintenance cost is quite huge. In South America, if I'm not wrong, probably in Latin America, if I'm not wrong, there was an estimate that for every dollar that you do not spend on maintenance, you have to spend $3 to $4 just in early reconstruction. And there are like recurrent lessons that we have and ample evidence of the benefits of maintenance. Yet investing in this infrastructure maintenance is a huge challenge across the world and also in Bhutan. I think the simplest solution, of course, financing is very broad, but the simplest solution is how can we talk about establishment of such maintenance funds as an institutional response, you know, to these kind of maintenance. And the first step would be to study the feasibility of such establishment of maintenance fund for all structures in the Dzongkhas. And then we can also zoom down to SGP funded. So that is my one cent, one solution answer. Thank you.
Dr. Jimmy or Tashi, do you have any more to add on that? No?
Just to just add on to what Nawang sir has pointed out. So this is a kind of a thing that we have been tackling on. Because one good example that we have is we are currently piloting across the countries something called spring revival recharge measures. So trying to revive drying water sources. And for that, we identify the recharge areas. In that recharge areas, we're trying to put on measures like what Ms. Madam Payne has put on, like small scale cabin wall or road walls and all. And the maintenance is kind of become an issue because right now we are doing it because we have some project funds through GCF, through Red Plus and all. But what's when the project is exhausted now? So for that, what we have tried to work out with the communities is we're trying to involve the communities from the very start itself. They have helped us identifying the recharge areas. They have helped us identifying the recharge measures. And we are slowly actually handing it over to the communities now. So communities will be taking it over once the project is over. And they will do it because it's benefiting them, because the recharge measures is reviving the drying spring. And that's kind of helping them to revive their crop production or the drinking water. So that's one thing. Another thing we have is on the landscape mechanism, which I could consider as the payment for ecosystem services. There, in that case, it's the users who do the maintenance. So the service providers, for example, local communities, they do the services, kind of maintain the wall, or they do the cleaning, river cleaning and everything. But on that activities that they provide the users, the municipal or the municipalities or the downstream users, they kind of compensate them through annual fees. And that fees is kind of diverted or partly been used for maintenance or so. So I'm thinking that maybe this PES and the reviving drying water source could be an example where we ensure that there is a sustainability of any program. And for the Red Plus program, one of the safeguard that I was talking about, the Cancun safeguard, it also talked about how to ensure that there is no reversal. For example, when there's a project, you protect a forest. Once the project is over, then you cut down. So which means all the efforts that you put forward over the past years is gone down the drain. And to ensure that, as I was mentioning earlier, we have to ensure that we get the communities on board, get their support. And if we establish a mechanism whereby the users are kind of contributing to the communities, so this should actually keep going the program on Sinhomela. So these are something that from my experience, that maybe Tejas has more to add on. Thank you.
All right. I think Ngawang and Jimmy has already thrown a lot of light. But this is a classic question of project sustainability, and I think in terms of the ways and means to some examples were already given by Ngawang and Jimmy. Probably to me, I personally believe that most important is, I think, engaging stakeholders or right holders early on. And I guess, and I'm a firm believer that our central planning agency, Gross National Happiness Commission, I've seen that they have really transitioned from prescriptive project planning to more of project planning based on listening. And I believe that projects of late have been more sustainable. And I guess it goes along with the decentralized approach that the government is taking. I believe things do not happen overnight. And like climate change, something like like innovation, like managing change, I think we have to go agile, because all projects are not the same. You cannot put one size like a shoe fit for all projects. Some projects, by the nature of projects, you should understand that it's a one-time project. And if you are really thinking about sustainability and other equations, we may never even complete the project. But there are other projects, especially ecosystem-based projects, nature-based projects, conservation projects. Definitely, I think sustainability is never not featured in the planning as well as in the implementing aspects. But rule number one, engage stakeholders and right holders from day one. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I may just add one more in there, and I know I'm not a speaker, but just take the liberty to do. Talking of stakeholders, one of the things when it comes to sustainability, I always, I'm obviously a big advocate for entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship, but an entrepreneur within the community or entrepreneur who share the same value space is also a very important stakeholder. And for entrepreneurs, is an incentive to be part of such projects because in the startup to have, number one, the grant to help build the kind of the baseline or the ground up work, but number two, the credibility it lends to be part of such initiative. It actually helps and benefits the entrepreneur as well as it will help the community. But more beyond that is after the project period is over, you're able to build a business model, a business case around it, which will then help to, number one, make sure the project goes beyond just the project time period, but also it helps the entrepreneur to keep this going because it's his business or her business, and also to have clear demarcation of how the remuneration or how the benefits will be brought back. And this is what social entrepreneurship is, or social enterprises are. But I feel like in Bhutan, there's this thing of lack of trust, because you're always questioned. If you're an entrepreneur, you're part of this kind of initiative, you're always questioned in terms of what's your ulterior motive, what are you trying to get out of it, and also the optics of it for the funders and for the ones who are involved in it. So there's always, so we talk about it, and I think my point being that I think we have to get over this thing of optics, or whether over this thing of lack of trust, because at the end of the day, you have to let it play out and see how it works. And for sustainability, I feel the entrepreneurs would play a big role in sustaining it beyond just the project period. So that was just my 2 cents or 3 cents, but let me move on to the next question. It's from Facebook and from Mr. Lotte Galson. The dialogue and documents of community participation is in paper in many policies of different organizations. How is this measured? Is this inclusion in terms of community participation in the documents just to secure funding? So it's a question of, are we just being hypocritical, or are we just really truly trying to carry through the values? Who would like to go at it first? The brave one. Or I'll be happy to pick someone. Okay, I picked Tashi then. Tashi, you want to go at it first?
All right. This is a tricky question, and I guess all of us who have been engaged in development planning, conservation planning, project implementation, program implementation. This is definitely a tricky question for all of us. But at the same time, we also understand, having walked the talk, probably not walked as much as we could have walked the talk, but definitely walked the talk. I believe that there are success stories. And like I said, in managing change, managing innovation, you need to be agile. And even in terms of your views at how you look at how stakeholders have been engaged, I think it's a case by case. And probably, I think this is a very good time. I saw Sonam Pem from Tarayana in the attendee list, and maybe I just want to give a shout out to Tarayana Foundation. And if you have been to Samsila, Jigme, Singi, Wangchuk villages, that's a classic example of how stakeholder engagement has transcended from paper to actual on the ground, and the impacts that it has generated. You just got, sometimes you got to go and visit. But at the same time, Mr. Lote, I do not discredit what you are saying. There are oftentimes, I think, this fatigue of too much consultations. Maybe sometimes organizations like us, UNDP, WWF, people are also quite fatigued with all this kind of talks that we do. But I guess it has its own impacts. But definitely, I personally feel, at least for the projects that I worked with, stakeholders consultations are essential sometimes, but then you have to also understand if it is some specific donor-based projects, it becomes a requirement also. And if it is a template requirement, how do you go away from not filling it? Because like you say, it's true, if you don't fill it, you will not get the funding resources. And if you don't get the funding resources just because you didn't fill a template, it means that money is not going to come to your country, and you're not going to be able to implement activities that you have planned. So this is a tricky situation, but I guess sometimes you got to look at it from the bright side as well. So maybe if Ngawang, Jigme, if you want to add.
Just thank you, very good question. So actually, I would take this as a very good compliment for us. It says that if this is featuring in all agencies, the community-based everything is featuring in every agency's mandate, or it shows that the agencies is taking communities very seriously. And for our program, we take community consultation very seriously. And it's, as Sdgs was mentioned, it's a requirement. And it's a requirement from donor side, it's a requirement from our side also. Because as we were talking about sustainability earlier, as Sdgs was mentioning, taking on board stakeholders at the right early time. So to do that, we need to have communities on board. We need to do community consultations. But doesn't mean that we do so many community consultations. From our side, we try as much as possible to minimize, to take on more all, to do it as little as possible, but to get information whatever is required. And the one reason why I see that community consultation is coming up again is because we are promoting something called what we all know, decentralization policy. This has been going on since ages now, promoted all the way from our His Majesty Kings. So if we have to have inclusive planning, then we need to take on board the grassroots communities. And to take on grassroots communities, we need to ensure that we do this community consultations. So I would, in a gist, I would say that I would take this as a compliment, which means the government agencies or our partners like WWF, UNDP, Bhutan Ecological Society, and every partners present here today, we are taking this community consultation very seriously. So I'm thank you to Mr. Loti for bringing up this up, and but we take on note that we don't do too much consultations, and that we make the communities fatigue on coming to our communities. I mean our consultation meetings. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think we are kind of running against time, but there's a comment from one of our earlier panelists. The challenge we face in involving entrepreneurs is that when NEC invites business representatives, it is looked as an environment discussion rather than opportunities where They can also be part of the environment project finances, and as such, the participation is often not the right people from the business community. Well, if I can just go at it first, and then maybe I'll open it up to the speakers. But I think, Sonam, you've mentioned the thing in your statement itself. I think is which kind of business representatives you're reaching out, or your word is getting out to. I think more and more the younger generation of entrepreneurs who function within more an ecosystem perspective is more open to such things versus I think established family business enterprises that have in a private sector history is the kind of the prominent ones. They may not necessarily have the bandwidth as well as the kind of the agility to kind of be involved in such things. But maybe if you target more the younger generation, lot of entrepreneurs that are looking more from a social enterprise perspective, you might get some traction there. But I truly acknowledge that as well. And that goes to our earlier points of how we each sit on our own things and don't necessarily talk across aisle. But the three panelists, do you want to say anything to this comment?
Maybe I think,
yes.
Yeah,
yes.
It's a good statement. And actually, I think you did a good job in answering. Just to supplement, when you talk about entrepreneurship, especially here, social entrepreneurship or green entrepreneurship, we tend to look at, I'm not generalizing, but from the young entrepreneurs that I've interacted, we tend to look at all the things in the, all putting all eggs into one basket and looking at conventional, products and markets and other things. I have been trying to advocate to young entrepreneurs, particularly in the green sector, that, as GNH, this is we are in a uniquely placed opportunity where we can actually do niche-based products, and that's where we can do wonders. And as my colleague Mani has spoken earlier, like for example, bioprospecting, it's very tricky, takes a long time, but there are like niche-based products, GNH certified products, green certified products coming from Bhutan. So those things I think has a lot of opportunities that I see. Of course, the life cycle of entrepreneurship will be tricky. These are the new field. Chile, you understand much better than I do. But from the green fence, this is a constant reminder that I urge our young entrepreneurs.
We are actually at lunchtime, and I think we're probably losing a lot of our audience because, of course, the stomach calls. So let me end here. I think I will not do any wrap up. We have done enough of talking, and I will hand it over to Kitso.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lechoran, and to all the esteemed panel speakers for a very illustrative dialogue and meaningful discussion. We are running a little overtime, but if everyone can stay on for a little longer, as we've come to the very last segment of the agenda. So next up, we have the key takeaways from the audience. I will now pass the floor to Ms. Pim Lama. On to you, Ms. Pim.
Thanks, Kitso, and thank you so much to the earlier panelists for your really lively and wonderful discussion. Because we wanted to make this a dialogue, I thought we'll also give some time to our audience to say some things and share some key takeaways. I know that we're losing some, but I know that today we have audience such as the Member of Parliament from especially the Environment and Natural Resources Committee. We also have people joining in from different Zongkaks and the GUPS offices, as well as some of the NGO CSOs joining in. So I would like to now open the floor to maybe hear about, just something you learned or, whatever thoughts you may have just as a conclusion to this event. And I would suggest that you maybe raise your hand because you're not a part of the panelists. You're not currently being seen, but maybe if you raise your hand and then we can try to promote you to panelists so you can come and share some of your thoughts. So open to all our attendees, especially on Zoom. If you'd like to share some thoughts, and especially I would like to invite maybe some of our MPs because they're also representing our community and so much of our discussion has been on community. So any thoughts from the audiences, please request you to raise your hands. And I would request Tenzin and my colleagues to look out for hands raised and notify us. I guess the lunch call is way stronger. Any thoughts or any questions in the end? If not, maybe I will go on to the closing remarks. Okay, I don't see any hands being raised. So if that's okay, since it's 1 and it's way beyond our 3:01, and it's way beyond our allotted time, I'll go on to closing. So firstly, I would like to thank everyone, including Honorable Lempo, who's not here with us, but for opening the session, and for Amasusa for joining us from Japan, as well as all of the members of parliaments who are present with us here as attendees. I would also like to thank all the panelists for a very engaging discussion, which really shed light on some of the nuances as well as challenges and opportunities for really encouraging community to be a part of conservation and a part of biodiversity conservation specifically. I would also like to thank the Jeff SGP and the UN Bhutan, as well as RGOB for your partnership in organizing this dialogue. This dialogue was a product of a lot of bilateral consultations with you and your departments. So thank you very much for your continued partnership in taking forward this conversation. Of course, this dialogue is just one event, and it's just called a dialogue, but to truly move forward in integrating, mainstreaming, upscaling landscape approach and conservation in our country, I think we must turn this dialogue into a continuous conversation. So I hope that we keep continuing to have this conversation beyond this event, especially the attendees, and especially when we talk about involving communities. I think it was well mentioned how their inclusion is something that we need to maybe improve on further. So I hope we can do that. For those who are working on biodiversity conservation directly or indirectly, I hope you have left these dialogues with many ideas on how your work can be enhanced, integrated, and furthered using, I think, some of the ideas that are coming out of this event. Also, just before I leave, I would like to thank you for setting out setting the morning aside for this virtual event and choosing to be with us instead of getting your second doses of vaccines. But of course, I think we should all get vaccinated. So I hope you keep safe, have a good rest of the afternoon, and very thank you. Thank you. Thanks to all of the audiences joining us. I think there was something I see on the comments box. There was some other questions. I think because of the time limit, we will just leave this comments, maybe answer this question through emails or through our Facebook comment section. But thank you all so much, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Maybe we can type the answer to Tech. I have his email address.
Yes.